Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dazzle Abatis, the Program Officer for NTFP-EP Asia, and I'll be facilitating the first part of our event this afternoon. So for some technical reminders, our meeting this afternoon's main language is English. So to listen to other languages, just click the interpretation button in the lower center part of your screen. If you are using the Zoom mobile app, look for the 3 dots on the lower part of the screen and then click on the 3 dots and then click language interpretation and select your language. This afternoon, we have simultaneous interpretations for Bahasa, Filipino, Khmer, Vietnamese, Burmese, and Lao, with Lao in the Spanish channel. In case you are bothered by the faint voice of the regional speaker, click mute original audio during the interpretation process. All participants' microphones will be muted by default upon entry. And then during the Q&A portion, if you wish to ask a question, please click raise hand using the participants' reactions feature before starting to speak. You may also use the chat feature to ask your questions and type the question in the chat box. For any technical issues, you can send a private message to our technical team directly in the chat box. Again, we wish everyone a good afternoon and good morning wherever you are. We welcome you all to the technical seminar and knowledge sharing on Customary Tenure and FPIC. This technical seminar and knowledge sharing event aims to provide a platform for the ASEAN member states, civil society organizations, and indigenous peoples organizations, and other relevant sector and actor to discuss and understand the current trends and opportunities on customary forest tenure and free, prior, and informed consent within the ASEAN countries and generate useful inputs into the development of a regional policy framework on customary tenure recognition. The Non-Timber Forest Products Exchange Program Asia organized this event in partnership and collaboration with the Civil Society Organizations Forum on Social Forestry in ASEAN, the ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry, and the ASEAN Secretariat. We are also grateful for the support of the Mekong Regional Land Governance Project, Mrlg, and the Green Livelihoods Alliance, GLA. To cut the long introduction short, we are honored to have distinguished keynote and welcome speakers for this afternoon. And to start off, may we call on Dr. Bambang Supriyanto. Dr. Bambang Supriyanto is the Director General of Social Forestry and Environmental Partnership, Ministry of Environment and Forestry, Republic of Indonesia, and the Chair of the ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry, AWGSF. Previously, he held a number of leadership positions in the ministry, including heading of Planning Bureau, Director of Research and Development for Social Economic, Forest Policy and Climate Change Center, and Director of Utilization of Environmental Services of Conservation Forests. Thank you, Pa Bambang, and the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you. Distinguished delegates of the ASEAN member countries, ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry Partner, NTFP-EP and GSO Forum on Social Forestry, participant, guests, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, selamat siang. It is really great honor to be here welcoming you on the technical seminar and knowledge sharing on customary tenure and free prior informed consent in ASEAN, status, challenges, and opportunity. I would like to thanks to the NTFP-EP and GSO Forum on Social Forestry in ASEAN that organized the event in collaboration with the ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 situation is taking the endless opportunity for us to communicate through online. And we should take this as a chance to have an active engagement in ASEAN cooperation. More than ever, we should see this as an opportunity to maintain our goal, have more extensive sharing experiences, and learning without border. Our present today show our commitment to implement what already deliberated during the 15th ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry meeting on 10th of June 2021, that is developing the ASEAN Guidelines for the Customary Forest Tenure Recognition in 2022. This is our first step of the process in developing the guideline as our contribution to the plan of action for the ASEAN Cooperation in Social Forestry 2021-2025. ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry contribution collaborated with the development partner has been recognized in ASEAN cooperation. This working group developed several guidelines, among other ASEAN Guidelines on Social Agroforestry Development, Regional Agroforestry for the Climate Resilient Landscape Manual, and ASEAN Guideline for the Sustainable Harvest and Resources Management Protocol for the selected non-timber forest product that have been endorsed. We pleased to see the progress implementation of those guidelines and manual, and the contribution to the ASEAN cooperation has reached beyond forestry sector. As a cross-sectoral issues, social forestry not merely provide the legal access of the tenure aspect, however, contribute to three pillars of the sustainability of the social, ecology, and economic. Distinguished delegate, ladies and gentlemen, Indonesia marked the important milestone on agrarian reform in 2020 through social forestry. For the first time, social forestry included under the law that is the job creation law in 2020. The technical implementation regulated under the government regulation number 23 of 2021 on forest administration and ministerial decree on number 9 2021 on social forestry management. Those regulations define the 5 schemes of the social forestry, namely village forest, community forest, people plantation forest, forestry partnership, and adat forest. Adat forest mean in some terminology in international say indigenous forest, or perhaps you are more familiar with the customary forest. Those schemes are part of our national strategy in implementing sustainable forest management as well as tenure conflict resolution. Indonesia government already defined that 1.1 million hectares allocated to adat forest or customary forest that will be distributed in 15 provinces to protect the living space of the adat community, to conserve local wisdom and traditional knowledge that inherited our generation. Our paradigm shift beyond to protect and conserve community and adat community to provide economic equity by promoting up and downstream approach by clustering commodities, which is intended to create regional center for the social forestry product based on sub-district region. We realize the target is not an easy task. However, we are optimistic with the clear pathway already lay ahead. We have a clear guidance under the law regarding the procedure to recognize the adat community. The central government will collaborate with the local government to achieve the target. Distinguished delegate, ladies and gentlemen, ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry is a platform to sharing knowledge and learning among ASEAN member states. I am pleased that the work on national level may contribute to the regional work. I believe across ASEAN countries, each country has different approach to develop of adat, so that today's event could enrich our knowledge to develop comprehensive regional framework on customary or adat tenure recognition. Last but not least, I wish that the step that we are taking today may contribute for the more engagement in the future. Thank you very much. Wish you all a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pa Bambang, for that very inspiring message. We go next to Pa Dian Sukmajaya. Pa Dian is the Senior Officer under the Food, Agriculture and Forestry Division, Sectoral Development Directorate of the ASEAN Economic Community Department of the ASEAN Secretariat. He started professional career in forestry since 1997 as environment specialist at the Association of Indonesian Forest Concession Holders, then joined the ASEAN Secretariat in 2008, tackling relevant issues in forestry such as sustainable forest management, forest law enforcement and governance, forest certification, among others. His expertise is in forest natural conservation policy, sustainable forest management, and forest governance. Pa Dian, the online spotlight is yours.
Thank you, Dazzle. Can you hear me?
Yes, Pa.
Okay, thank you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon and good morning for colleagues from the other parts of the world. Honorable Dr. Bambang Supriyanto, Director General Social Forestry and Environment Partnership, Ministry of Environment and Forestry, Republic of Indonesia, in his capacity as Chair of the ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry. Dr. Micah Ingalls, Team Leader Mekong Region on Land Governance Mrlg Project. Colleague from NTFP-EP, distinguished colleagues, participants from ASEAN member state, ladies and gentlemen. In this very good occasion, I would like to extend a high gratitude to Dr. Bambang, who has been making his time available for this important regional seminar on strengthening the recognition of customary tenure and FPIC in ASEAN. Indonesia, as a lead country of the ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry, has significantly contributed to enhancing social forestry development in the region by giving lead as an example, and also, of course, with the support of good collaboration from all ASEAN member states. I would like to also thank to Mrlg and also, of course, NTFP-EP for excellent arrangement for this technical seminar. As we may be aware, forestry has met another momentum this year, in particular on its uniqueness and capability to take significant role in addressing climate change. During the COP26 Glasgow, the leaders declare on forest and land use, and it saw commitment from the leaders to work collectively to halt and reverse forest loss and land degradation by 2030, while delivering sustainable development and promoting an inclusive rural transformation. The global leaders has underlined the need to reduce vulnerability, build resilient and enhance rural livelihoods, including through empowering communities, the development of profitable sustainable agriculture and recognition of multiple value of forests, while also recognizing the right of indigenous peoples as well as local communities in accordance with relevant national legislation and international instruments as appropriate. There are so many interesting developments at international negotiations related to climate change at present that will also shape future regional cooperation to adapt and mitigate to the impact of climate change. I just would like to emphasize several areas that related to the forestry cooperation. Firstly, regarding nature-based solution, I would like to emphasize that NBS has been an effective solution to address important global challenges such as climate change, forest degradation and deforestation, as well as forest fire. I believe Social Forestry Working Group also has been doing and will do a significant contribution to this dialogue. Secondly, promoting decarbonization initiative in forestry sector. It has become crucial as forest plays a significant role in carbon neutral. In this connection, we should enhance our concerted effort in effectively implementing REDD+ program in ASEAN, which aim to reduce net emissions of greenhouse gases and enhance forest management. I think social forestry also has important role in climate change mitigation. Lastly, forest and forest-based products can play a key role in circular economy by providing a renewable sources of raw materials. More coordinated approach that aims to tap into the full potential of forest sector can turn this sector into one of the key pillars of the circular economy. Further study on forest and circular economy might be considered within the context of sustainable forest management. Might also be interesting for the ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry to think over circularity in non-timber forest products development. I think this is the area that also NTFP-EP might be considered. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, back to the region, as also mentioned by Dr. Bambang, ASEAN has emphasized on the need for inclusive and economic development in forestry sector by promoting social forestry, community forestry development in the region since more than a decade ago. Furthermore, sustainable forest management has been an important value for all ASEAN member states to ensure that forest resources provide economic, maintaining ecology, as well as provide social beneficiaries. Toward that direction, it is necessary for ASEAN member states and also other stakeholders to simultaneously promote and ensuring forest tenure security. At the regional level, under the SPA and Forestry Cooperation 2016-2025, to ensure sustainable forest management, ASEAN member state has agreed to conduct review of customary and statutory tenure arrangement at the national level, including access and use rights of indigenous people, local community, forest community, and other forest-dependent communities to ensure that they are recognized, respected, and protected by effective legislation, including the principle of FPIC. To materialize this commitment, ASEAN during the 24th ASOF meeting, based on the AWG on social forestry recommendation, has agreed to develop ASEAN Guidelines for customary forest tenure recognition. This guideline will be one of key deliverables for ASEAN Cooperation in Forestry 2022 and expected to be adopted by the ministers during its 44th AMAF meeting in 2022. I believe through Indonesia leadership and support of AWGSF members, as well as partners, in this case, Mrlg and NTFP-EP, the guidelines will be timely developed and ready to be submitted to ministers in October 2022. The guidelines hopefully could be a reference for ASEAN member states to further strengthen national policies toward involvement of community living within and surrounding the forest for sustainability and prosperity of the people. With those many interesting developments surrounding forestry cooperation, I would like to encourage the members of ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry and also partners to explore new areas of collaboration. As I mentioned earlier, ASEAN Secretariat is welcome and ready to collaborate with partners to have more detailed discussion in supporting and strengthening our regional cooperation. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, I hope that this technical seminar could come up with the initial outline of the guidelines, and I do hope for fruitful and productive discussion. Again, I would like to extend appreciation to Indonesia as a lead country of the ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry, and also to organizer and ASEAN member state participation at this event. Thank you very much. Back to you, Dazel.
Thank you very much, Paddy. And wow, that was like a summary of all the developments and new trends in forestry and social forestry in just a few minutes. Thank you for emphasizing the need to explore areas for new collaboration and interesting developments in the field of forestry and social forestry in light with the COP26, which is already coming to a close. Next, we call on Dr. Mika Ingles. Dr. Mika Ingles is the team leader of the Mekong Regional Land Governance Project, MRLG. MRLG aims to improve the land tenure security of smallholder farmers in Cambodia, Laos, PDR, Myanmar, and Vietnam by supporting reforms in policy and practices of the public sector. Let's welcome Dr. Mika Ingles.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope my connection's okay. Great, thank you. So, dear colleagues, especially Dr. Supriyanto and Dr. Supajaya, distinguished representatives of the ASEAN Secretariat and ASEAN member states and civil society. Also, a very special thanks to the ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry, the CSO Forum on Social Forestry, and NTFP for organizing this very important event. Ladies and gentlemen, so allow me please just to add my brief remarks to those of my colleagues who have already said much of what needs to be said today, and also to issue a special thanks on behalf of Mrlg, and appreciation to all of you for having us involved in this important event. As many of you may know, the Mekong Region Land Governance Project has been working in the 4 Mekong countries of Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam, focusing specifically on the tenure security of smallholder farmers. In that work, the approach that we take is primarily working together with partners in the public sector, in private sector, and civil society, particularly to help bridge the gaps between different social actors, between those advocating for change, those trying to bring about those changes, and for especially the public sector, for the government agencies that are trying to perform their public service in a way that's effective and efficient and equitable in trying to steer the trajectory of national development and also conservation in each of the countries. In that approach that we take, we now work together with 84 different member institutions drawn from these different sectors, working primarily on 2 different domains of action. So one of these is the recognition of customary tenure, and the other is with regard to the responsible agricultural investments in the region. In both of those works, we work quite closely together with ASEAN. So with respect to responsible agricultural investments, we work particularly in the application of the ASEAN RAI guidelines. And with regard to customary tenure, of course, is very much the topic of discussion today and tomorrow in the development of a guideline for recognition of customary tenure in forest areas. I think what we find then across that work in those 2 domains of action is that forest areas probably are the most critical spaces in which important changes are needed. Mostly because legal frameworks recognizing or handling tenure security of smallholder farmers are probably least well developed in forest areas in many of the countries. There's a large degree of ambiguity with regard to legal frameworks, what kinds of provisions will apply with regard to the protection of farmers' rights, and in terms of the procedural approaches for how to recognize those in practice. So I think here we find then today is quite an important opportunity as we consider the recognition of customary tenure in these forest areas. Here what we see is especially the opportunity for national development in that forest areas are often home to communities of higher poverty rates than the national averages in many cases, often ethnic minorities, and commonly those, as we've said, with less tenure security or with less formalized systems for recognizing tenure security. So I think that what we find cannot invest in their land if they don't have the confidence of forest areas. is a great moment. So not only to achieve these goals with regard to national development, but also as we think about global climate change, particularly in light of COP26, which wraps up this week in Glasgow, and the great potential we have for enhancing tenure security in forest areas for climate change mitigation benefits. So I think probably without saying much more, we at Mrlg are enthusiastic in our support to support the ASEAN Secretariat, the social working group on and adapting social forestry in this area. And as we continue to work in support of the public sector and our government partners in each of the countries, we express again our appreciation and enthusiastic support for that. So without further, I'd like to just wish everyone a very good next 2 days. We hope it'll be a very constructive discussion and a very productive one. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mika Ingalls, for those encouraging messages and for MRLG's continued support to strengthening customary tenure and FPIC in forested landscapes in ASEAN. Thank you also for emphasizing the need for enhancing tenure security in the context of climate change resiliency and recognizing forest areas and indigenous people and local communities as partners in climate change adaptation and mitigation. I think that wraps up the opening key messages and welcome remarks. Thank you to our distinguished leaders and champions of the critical theme we will discuss today. And so we kick off with the first session, and to moderate the session, I'll be handling the floor, the virtual floor rather, to Ms. Femi Pinto, our Executive Director at the Non-Timber Forest Products Exchange Program Asia, also a member of the Regional Customary Tenure Alliance in the Mekong under the Mekong Regional Land Governance Project. A brief introduction to Ms. Femi. Ms. Femi has almost 2 decades of experience, a combination of work in the field with indigenous and local grassroots communities in the Philippines, Mekong countries, and the ASEAN region, management in NGOs, and convening of regional multi-stakeholder networks around forest and natural resources management and governance, tenure, livelihoods, and food security. She holds a master's degrees in international development and international policy. Ms. Femi, please, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Dazzle, and thank you to all our participants for today. And good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be. Before sliding into our first session, I wish to extend our thanks also on behalf of NTFP to all the participants in this seminar, and especially recognizing the presence of our distinguished delegates from the ASEAN member states and led by no other than Dr. Bambang Supriyanto, who is the chair of the ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry. Also welcoming our partners and co-organizers and collaborating institutions, particularly the ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry, the ASEAN Secretariat led by our good friend Padian Sukmajaya, the Civil Society Forum on Social Forestry in ASEAN, and the Mekong Region Land Governance Project, as well as the Green Livelihoods Alliance and their funders from the Swiss Development Cooperation Agency and the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Tenure covers multiple rights, including at the minimum, the right to access, the right to make management decisions, and the right to withdraw resources from a particular area. I think just from our keynotes already, they already acknowledged and emphasized the importance of it. The FAO also in 2002 further defined customary forest tenure as a set of rules and norms that govern a community's relationship and use of forest, land, and other natural resources. It is a set of socially legitimate, informal, and de facto rules and norms that regulate community allocation, use, access, and transfer of these natural resources. Today, in this virtual seminar, we tackle this important topic to initiate a critical collaborative process that we envisage to proceed for the next months. And I'm glad that Pat Dian mentioned already a target of actually submitting a set of guidelines for endorsement and approval at the highest level in ASEAN by October 2022. we expect and we really hope that this collaboration continues on through that time, and all together with yourselves, the participants, our speakers for today, delegates from the ASEAN member states, and in particular the ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry. We really look forward to this alliance moving forward. Personally, for me, I was very much encouraged already just from the keynotes, and that we continue to be supported and led by social forestry champions. We have had, NTFP had some experience already in the development of ASEAN guidelines on the sustainable harvest and management of NTFPs. And this is our, we could say, a second concrete policy and guidelines collaboration with the ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry, and we really look forward to it. And we have had a very good experience working with these champions to push ahead to the next level, and that would be on customary tenure recognition. So our session for today, our first session, will help set the scene about customary forest tenure recognition and FPIC for this seminar. We are very much delighted to have these three speakers with us. And before inviting them, or before coming to this seminar, we have requested them to reflect on the following questions, and we will hear kind of a synthesis of their contributions to help set the scene. And these questions are, what is the current situation at the global regional level in terms of customary tenure recognition? What are the policy opportunities and that they envisage that could help also inform the process that we will be undertaking in the coming months? What would be the interesting entry points or enabling mechanisms and opportunities in terms of integrating possibly FPIC in customary tenure recognition? And what would be kind of guideposts for us that we could use in that regard? So I'd like to now open that first session, and I would be pleased to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Alain Fletcher. I hope that I pronounce your name and your last name, Alain, well. And he's a director for strategic analysis and global engagement at the Rights and Resources Initiative, where he oversees coalition-led thematic work on climate and conservation priorities. He holds a PhD in environmental science and has over 25 years of experience in natural resources management, biodiversity conservation, and climate change, with a focus on human, indigenous, and community rights in the context of international development. Before RRI, he had been working in various positions and technical assignments with various organizations from NGOs and also development partners such as DFID, World Bank, and also various UN institutions across Africa, Asia, Europe, and Latin America. I'd like to welcome Dr. Alain Fletcher.
Yes, okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Femi, for the wonderful introduction. And thank you all very so much for inviting me to be part of this engagement. I'm really thrilled to be part of this discussion and very happy to represent RI in this opportunity. So I'd like to briefly walk you through some of the global trends that we've assessed over time that gives us a sense of how land management, I'm trying to see the slides. All right. So how land and forests are being attributed, and FPIC within that context. So first, we should acknowledge that globally, communities hold customary rights to over half of the global landmass, yet only hold legal rights, ownership of 10% of this area. Another 8% is designated for their use. but designation does not include the right to obtain due process and compensation, nor allow the community to hold that right for an unlimited duration. So this is a critical issue that needs to be acknowledged. In Asia, more specifically, the lion's share of land that is actually legally recognized today is in China. And so the majority of land in Asia is only designated for communities, which is a key issue for recognizing their non-timber forest product rights. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of who owns the world's forests, trends over the last 15 years show that there's been a steady increment in the amount of land that is designated or owned by communities. Nearly 150 million hectares have been attributed to communities since 2002, showing a clear positive trend towards more and more devolution of rights towards communities. Yet, governments still maintain legal administrative authority to over 70% of this forest lands, and for most of these areas and land areas, they're contested. They're contested by communities, by rights holders, and most of that land area that is also labeled as government is actually licensed or under concessionary agreements with private landholders. So even though private forest ownership has remained relatively steady, a large share of the government real estate is actually in the hands of private industry for their own use and benefit. Next slide, please. The important message here that we would like to emphasize is that the positive trend towards reform and recognition of community rights can actually be accelerated and done so quite dramatically. This data shows that by implementing existing legislation in just a handful of countries, we could actually more than double the amount of land area that has been so far recognized for communities. This includes over 40 million hectares in India through the Forest Rights Act, and 40 million hectares in Indonesia through the Adat Forest-based Constitutional Court ruling that was agreed to in 2013. Other countries have similar areas to be recognized, and one of the more greater potential ones is in DRC in the Congo Basin. But what this slide underscores is that there is actually things that we can do to secure rights and advance community benefits through existing legislation. Next slide, please. In terms of free, prior, and informed consent, the data on the state of FPIC across the world is a little bit less well developed. There is interesting research that was conducted by Landmark in NWRI in 2016, which shows that 36 out of 39 countries assessed do not have FPIC laws that provide indigenous communities with strong legal rights to their free, prior, and informed consent. Only 3 countries, the Philippines, Colombia, and Peru, incorporated strong FPIC rights in their national laws and legislation. Across the world, women seldom have the same protection as their male counterparts, and this is a fundamental challenge that really needs to be addressed head-on and challenged in every way possible. In 2017, RI conducted a study called Power and Consent, where it was shown that across 30 tropical forest countries, the vast majority of those countries seldom recognize women's rights to vote, to engage in community-based decisions, and or inherit land from their if their spouse, male counterpart, died or separated. There are legal frameworks that can help advance FPIC rights, but the vast majority of these are not either recognized by states, such as ILO Convention 169, or some of them, such as the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, are not recognized. The FPIC interpretation that is recognized within this is not recognized by states. Or you have other agreements, such as the UNDRIP and the VGDTs, the Voluntary Guidelines on the Governance of Tenure, which recognize FPIC rights, but neither of these instruments are legally binding. In 2019, RI collaborated with the Indigenous Peoples Majors Group for Sustainable Development, the Global Landscape Forum, as well as the Forest Peoples Program to develop a set of principles that would guide all investments in landscape areas, whether for conservation, climate, or sustainable development purposes. The standard that was created, called the Land Rights Standard, it mentions or rather upholds the need for free, prior, and informed consent and the self-determination rights of Indigenous peoples across the world. It also advocates for the recognition of the rights of local communities to free, prior, informed, and substantive participation in decision-making that may impact their lands, resources, and livelihoods. We took care to indicate that for communities, local communities, and Afro-descendant peoples, because in many jurisdictions and countries, Indigenous peoples are simply not recognized. And so this offers an opportunity for communities to have some form of recognition, always recognizing that FPIC, in the way it is legally developed, is attributed to Indigenous peoples first. And also that the Land Rights Standard upholds and mentions across that the need for recognizing the rights of Indigenous people, Indigenous community, and Afro-descendant women. Next slide, please. Here's an interesting breakdown of how FPIC translates into action on the ground. This slide documents whether or not laws require consent of Indigenous peoples or communities before government or an outsider may acquire their land. And as we see here, only in the Philippines do we have clear procedures for inclusive, transparent consent required under the Philippines. All others in the ASEAN community fall either under consultation required, such as Cambodia and Indonesia, but consent is not obligated, or there's no obligation to consult or obtain the consentment of communities for various peoples. Next slide, please. Well, this is just a breakdown of what we're working on now. So the Who Owns the World's Land analysis that was first put out in 2015 is currently being updated and will be made available in the spring of 2022. Hopefully it will inform more decision-making needs and requirements. We are also updating support for economic women empowerment through a depth of rights analysis and how women's rights actually play out in 36 countries. And we're also conducting livelihoods rights assessment, which will be the first comprehensive overview of community rights to how manage, use, and benefit their land in terms of their rights to organize, their rights to market, their rights to associate, the right to transact, all of the rights that allow communities to set agreements within themselves or across with other constituencies to further their livelihood benefits. So I'll stop there for now. Thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Alain, for highlighting the key opportunity that presents itself to take concerted efforts towards customary tenure recognition, particularly forest tenure. And in fact, you've cited also some statistics that there is opportunity to double the gains of this positive trend happening globally, where with rights recognized, there could be felt benefits, including livelihood benefits attained by communities. But it's good that you also pointed out that while in the area of forest tenure, there's already this positive trend, maybe in the area of FPIC, it will still take a little bit more work, that the advancement is slower in this regard, but nonetheless, there is still an opening for that. And thank you also for including and highlighting also women's rights in this effort. I invite our participants to start. Maybe if you start getting some questions in your head, you can raise your questions in the chat. We will try and maybe call on one or two at the end of each session to generate also some discussion. But maybe in the interest of time, we can begin that exchange also via chat. So I would call on, thank you, Alain, for that. I'll call on our next speaker, Mr. Gam Shimray. Gam is from the Tangkul Naga community, one of the southern Naga tribes in Northeast India. Hang on. And Gam is the Secretary General of the Asian Indigenous Peoples Pact, also one of our members in the Civil Society Forum on Social Forestry in ASEAN. And AIPP itself is a regional organization headquartered in Thailand and founded in the 90s by indigenous peoples movements. AIPP is quite is expanding, has 46 members from 14 countries in Asia, including 8 ASEAN countries, with 18 indigenous peoples and national alliances, networks, and formations, and 30 local and subnational organizations. So they are quite, the base is quite wide, and I am very pleased to welcome Gam and give us also his and AIPP's perspective. Over to you, Gam.
Thank you, Femi, and greetings to distinguished delegates, speakers, and participants. That was a very inspiring presentation from Alain, and I'll just build on from there. In my presentation, of course, I'm looking out there for inspirations because we are talking about developing a new guideline, which is, of course, always exciting and very much look forward to it. So the first questions, of course, when we are looking at new things, something that is workable for us, the first question, is this whole issue of environmental sustainability, development, conflict, and less recognition of this customary tenure. Why are these big problems existing? Is it because of lack of political will, as many would attribute it to? Or is it the lack of vision, or is it both? Of course, I do believe that it's both, because actions need to be well oriented by a thought process until we reach a clear vision. So the vision to serve the larger goods, of the society. So vision to me is really important, and we have done a lot of work led by various organizations, the ASEAN and the civil society under this platform. And we're already looking at developing a guideline, which is an interesting commitment that we have made. So to start with is, of course, what Femi read out, what is a customary tenure and customary law, which is very important. I'm not repeating that, but I just want to add that it's not just the informal rules used by the communities, but very importantly, I think needs to be emphasized is that it is also this about explicitly ethical and moral code. Ethical referring to society's generally accepted understanding of what is right and wrong, and moral referring to individual understanding of what is right and wrong within the community. Because this question of right and wrong, I think, is important when we're looking out for setting out certain guidelines, policies, and so on. Now, the first thing is I would like to draw some inspiration from South Africa and Papua New Guinea. As many of you will know, Justice Sachs is considered the father of the South African Constitution. And he has used this Ubuntu, which is customary in the South African context, the concept and the value of Ubuntu that has been made integral part of the constitutional values and principles that inform interpretation of the Bill of Rights and other areas of law, and is considered to be giving a specific African flavor to the constitution in Africa towards a transformative constitution. And I think that is inspirational to me and could be something that like the ASEAN states and society could look towards. And also in Papua New Guinea, of course, customary law has been placed higher than common law, because yet a lot of things need to be still developed and pushed for, just like Alain presented in terms of procedures, rules, etc. Yet it is a good initiative, I consider it. Now, I think when we look at these guidelines and policies and so on, we need to be clear, and we need to clearly look out for these higher values and principles. And when we talk of this, of course, me as an indigenous person, I can point to some of these very important higher values and principles. Say in constitution around the world, for example, liberty is placed higher than the constitution. And therefore, constitution cannot violate those things, but constitution itself is subject to those understanding and interpretation of those higher values and principles. So for example, I think in the context of the sustainability of forestry governance, etc., what is to me very relevant is of these Ainu people in Japan, which they call it this Ureshi Pamashore, meaning that all living things and not just humans are an interrelated community. So if we question why, of course, it can be elaborated from other experiences like the Semai of this Malaysia, where they believe that not just humans, but everything that has breath, warmth, flows, moves, grows, have soul, and therefore all this soul are to be treated with utmost respect, because they believe that all entities in the natural world are no different from the insects, the flowers, the animals. So human beings are also spirit beings, all are spirit beings, and therefore they have this concept called tanhak, and this is rule that defines what is right and wrong for them, and also in their living way of living. So in some sense, this concept and value can be interpreted as co-responsibility, that we need to take care of every human society beings and also of nature. So all these aspects of nature-based solutions, etc., or living in harmony with nature becomes absolutely valuable. And these are practices already existing as higher values and principles within the customary regimes and worldviews. And I think that these are very inspirational. So there is a saying, and I think it has much to say, and so close to indigenous, the way I've put there in the end, that we are not human beings on a spiritual journey. Rather, we are spiritual beings in a human journey. So these kind of higher values and principles, our institutions, our laws, guidelines are to serve this, to meet these ends, this kind of visions. And I think it is not just about indigenous peoples, but it is to look at the larger good of the society when we talk about customary tenure rights and FPIC, etc. So, and there is also another very important thing is what indigenous peoples always stress is the higher values and principles with reference to agreements, because agreements are worth nothing if they cannot be honored and is harmful to society. And accepting these principles is a precondition to making a sincere agreement, you see, because you make an agreement, we don't fulfill it, we don't take it seriously, it causes a lot of harm. It causes a lot of anxiety as to why these things are happening. It can be very disruptive to the society. And actually there are terms to this kind of higher values and principles with reference to indigenous communities. And I think this should all be the basis of the inspiration. Now, so while looking at this as a guideline, I see it as an entry point to discussing this and how do we really actualize. So the guideline itself is an entry point because it is voluntary, non-binding, but it gives us this opportunity to do away with that kind of these ideas that these things are exclusive to indigenous, has nothing to do with the larger society, the state, and so on. But it has something to serve the larger society. You know, that is a way of giving also fresh breath and life to the ASEAN states itself, right? And in this, I just want to briefly say about this hardware and software when we talk about pluralism. So we are also looking at it from the prism of pluralism. So hardware can be referred to as institutions, guidelines, policies, and laws, you know? And software is the cultural work on this kind of higher values and principles and responsibilities. And I've used the term here, responsibilities, consciously, because when we talk about rights, it is always sometimes seen or connoted with a notion of exclusivity, right? But how do we actually generate responsibilities through these rights and higher values and principles? And we embrace this as part of our culture in our governance systems, you know, whether it's about conservation or good governance and so on. And to me, like a guideline, the ASEAN taking this initiative can really serve a kind of this twin approach of this hardware and software that can create this virtuous cycle of education and also a clear vision towards sustainability, institutional reforms towards sustainability. You know? But if you take this also negatively, depending on how we drive forward this software and the institutions, processes, and cultural work, it can also be negative. So I think in the positive sides, looking at these higher values and principles can serve a lot in educating within civil society, educational institutions, state and policy makers. You know? So states can use this as a piece of institution to enable and create this kind of space and environment where this kind of nature-based solutions, living in harmony with nature, and what laws policies ultimately needs to be there to serve this vision, you know, is what I would really recommend from my point of view. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much, Femi.
Thank you, Gam. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your sharing. Thank you for giving us an insight about the clear and real challenges that we have as we tackle the road towards customary tenure recognition. You mentioned about environmental sustainability and also the possibility of having to go through interpretation conflict of what tenure means. And you also mentioned about the moral norm basis, higher values and principles that could also be the fundamental base of what the framework or set of guidelines could be. And that, thank you for giving us examples of what some of those principles might be, and sharing also the inspiration from South Africa and with the Ainus. I recall Alain earlier mentioned about rights and benefits, and good that you also added the roles and responsibilities that go with rights recognition. So thank you for those pointers and suggestions for what we could consider moving forward. I I hope you can stay, and maybe if there are also questions in the chat, you might want to also respond. Thank you, Alain, for already sharing some of the resources that our participants could also look into. Our third and final speaker for this session is Maitin Newmon. She is the youth representative from our region and in the steering committee of the Indigenous Peoples Forum at IFAD, or in the International Fund for Agriculture Development. She's also the program director for the Indigenous Peoples Development Program of the Chin Human Rights Organization. And she represents the youth to the Executive Council of AIPP, and she's a young, prolific human rights activist, very much active even in the global scene. And currently, she is a member of the UN Global Indigenous Youth Caucus and have been active in the recent UN Food System Summit. So, Yumon, the floor is yours. Thank you for being here.
Hi, thank you, Femi. So yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, please excuse my coat because the weather is really cold and I'm not feeling that well. So yeah, it's great to be here talking to you all, and thank you to the organizers for this important topic. And at first I was thinking whether I should really speak about this land and resources thing while our country is facing the most tragic political instability, because most of the work that we have done in the past few years, looking forward to inclusive, transparent policy making regarding land and forest tenure and all these rights things, they have been swiped away by this political instability. So still, I strongly believe that it is in order to really achieve this, the rights that we are discussing, in order for people to really enjoy these rights, first and foremost, what we really need is to create political stability in the region, because the situation in Myanmar has also impacted a lot, like other instabilities in the region, as other ASEAN countries have seen now. So yeah, my earlier the speakers have already covered quite a lot about political, global and regional landscape. So I would rather talk more about youth's vision when it comes to land and land tenure. So as Femi mentioned, I was a part of this the global the UN Food System Summit 2021 as a youth vice chair, a youth co-chair to Action Track 4, which is ensuring equitable livelihoods for everyone. So when we talk about equitability, I'm sure most of I'm seeing like this amazing number of participants, and I've checked the names, and most of you have been actively participating in this discussion. So I'm sure you are aware of that. Throughout this UN Food System Summit process, there were a number of issues came out for the equitability. So when of course, producers, farmers, and all these stakeholder groups who are involved in this whole food systems, the global food systems are there in the discussion. And we had thousands of youths engaged in the process. And the topic that youths always highlighted in almost every dialogue, whether it's independent dialogue or whether it's government-led dialogue or thematic dialogue, what I saw was that lack of resources, lack of access to resources for youths when it comes to food security. And this has not only to do with the food security, but the social and political well-being of the youth groups. So when we talk about resources, again, it's of course, during the last Food System Summit, for example, governments like the US, they promised like $10 billion for food security, related work. But what the youths are questioning is how much of that will really get to into the hands of the youths and indigenous peoples who are really on the ground. So when we talk about resources, we are focusing more not only on these monetary things, but we are focusing a lot on land and forest resources when it comes to especially people in rural areas and indigenous communities. So, you know, there can be money outside there a lot, like big numbers, but these usually take so much time to really get to the ground, this money, because as you know, more than half of all these promises will go to the operational and the management cost. So for youths, in order to really function fully and in order to really to be able to be productive, to be able to practice really inclusive and productive means of livelihoods in the communities, and also to increase their incomes, the biggest basic need is this access to land and territory. So in order, especially for Asia, all we need for youths in the rural communities is access to our land and our resources. Of course, there have been a number of initiatives taken in different countries, but still for youths especially, there are a number of procedures that we need to go through in order to really to be able to have access to these resources. So it is really important that for the youths, without having much to struggle too much to get access to resources, to allow us to actively engage in the sustainable and resilient food systems, we really need access to our land and natural resources. And this gives not only a way for youth to be productive and to be able to survive. It promotes not only that, but also our ability to contribute into the knowledge, the indigenous knowledge, the food systems knowledge that we are practicing, and also to carry forward to make sure that this knowledge don't disappear and this knowledge don't go without being practiced, because they are too good to be lost. And if they lose all these knowledge, the indigenous knowledge that we receive, that we accumulate by practicing, by working in our land, and by having this attachment with the territories, the natural resources that we have, it's really gives us energy to continue to steward this Mother Earth. So in also for that, a very big important ingredient for that is the practice of free, prior, and informed consent in indigenous related work, especially when it comes to land and other development work. So usually free, prior, and informed consent is, of course, many people usually say that this is our right, and the right of indigenous peoples. But it's actually more than a principle. And this free, prior, informed consent is it really gives success and smooth engagement for not only for the indigenous peoples, but mainly for those who initiate these projects or programs or plans. So when it comes to governments, when it comes to private people from private sector, or even the communities themselves, community leaders. So it is not that it is really important that this free, prior, informed consent be acknowledged and recognized not only as a right, but also the main ingredient, the main tool for all these different stakeholder groups to help indigenous communities to perform better and to have meaningful and effective planning and working together. So I mean that should, of course, there are many agencies who already start this developing FPIC guidelines in their own, how should I say, in their own agencies, like including IFAD, FAO. They even have these, how should I say, awareness raising and like practice activities with their own staff, for their own staff. So we are seeing this expanding. But what I would really also like to recommend is that this not only goes as like a par agency to different groups, but it goes in a holistic approach, and especially for government agencies in the region to really start. There are some initiatives we have seen, but this needs to go in a stronger and in a more firm way, with a real political will, rather than just beating around the bush. We need to go straight into that, develop these FPIC guidelines together with the indigenous peoples and the local communities that exist in the country. Then that way, all these like forest related programs that we are trying to talk, and all these development programs that we would like to bring into indigenous communities will become success. Thank you very much. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Human, and I wish you get better soon. It's nice to see you, and thank you for giving us an insight of the important role that the youth would play, not just in the process, engaging them, process of the customary tenure recognition, if you will, process, but really even the application of it, the reaping the benefits of it, and seeing that there could be an assurance of the continuity of good practices in resource management, and also surrounding the area of livelihood and food security. And you also mentioned about the operational aspect and functioning to make it actually be more successful, and how the youth engagement could also form part of making the whole process successful and making the operationalization also successful. And thank you also for giving your insight about FPIC. And while there are already some developments in some development agencies having also the awareness raising and the mechanisms and maybe even the set of tools to implement it, there's still some work to be done. And that we should see it not just as a principle or a kind of something to put in as part of our tools, but really as a main ingredient for indigenous peoples to be able to have meaningful and sustainable livelihood and security for the future. Thank you so much, Yumon, for that. And I think I also relate to also what you said, and agree of the importance of political stability in order for any advancements to happen in development and even in policy. Political stability is very much important, and we should all try and work towards maybe achieving and having that back in our societies and in our lives. So thank you and wishing you well, Yumon. Right now, I see the time is 3:25 and we were supposed to knock off for this session around 3:15. So I would not be able to take on questions, but please, I do encourage, please post them in the chat and we will try and address them in the chat. And if our speakers are not able to stay, I hope that, yeah, just thank you, Alain, for going through the chat and also providing some resources. And right now, so I would have to move for our next sessions and my colleagues to be able to have enough time to go through the sessions. So let's pause and watch a very short video before I give back the floor to my colleague Dazzle to proceed with session 2. And I ask them to now play the video.
They were always here, the original inhabitants, the custodians of our planet. They have lived on their ancestral lands in harmony with nature for centuries. Their cultures are rich and diverse. They speak the majority of the world's languages. They are the guardians of some of the Earth's most precious resources and some of the most desired ones. The world's 370 million indigenous people are among the most vulnerable and disadvantaged populations in the world. They are facing increasing pressures to exploit their ancestral lands. The United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues gives them a voice, an international platform to share their challenges and find solutions.
2030 agenda has given the indigenous peoples a certain level of expectation and of hope that in this one, when they are going forward towards 2030, there will be some recognition and that it will be incorporated, their priorities, their concerns, their rights.
This year's forum will discuss the indigenous people's collective rights to lands, territories, and resources, and other threats facing the indigenous communities today.
And we hope that the end result will have positive impact to those communities who have been agitating when you talk about issues on land. And we hope even the recommendation can reach to the relevant government. And we also hope at the same time those recommendations can effectively implemented within the country and also disseminated to the community that they're affected.
I think, like with all other important international instruments and documents, the beauty and the power of all these is in the implementation. These are all like a roadmap. This is what the world has agreed it will do, and in this way, for the indigenous peoples, as with everybody else, I believe, everybody has a responsibility. As indigenous peoples always say, we are not the problem. We want to be part of the solution. We're not against development. We want to be part of development, but development on our terms.
The 2030 Agenda promises to leave no one behind. That promise includes the indigenous peoples. By protecting the rights of its custodians, we protect the future of our planet.
Thank you for that. And now back to Dazzle.
Thank you, Ms. Femi, and thank you for the excellent speakers, our resource speakers for session 1. Now we move on to session 2. Customary Tenure Recognition and FPIC in ASEAN. This is our home base, the ASEAN, and we hear from our speakers an overview of customary tenure recognition, specifically the efforts of regional alliance on customary recognition in the Mekong, as well as snapshot of free, prior, and informed consent in the ASEAN through the results of the research and synthesis of experience in the ASEAN. Let me introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Natalie Campbell. Natalie is the Regional Advisor for Customary Tenure and Gender for Mekong Regional Land Governance Program. Natalie is leading its regional program on customary tenure in forested landscapes in Cambodia, Laos, PDR, Myanmar, and Vietnam through both local and regional initiatives. Natalie also spearheads Mrlg's initiatives on gender and land, developing collaborative and transformative actions for gender-inclusive land governance. Prior to joining Mrlg, Natalie worked as a senior associate of the Asia team at the Rights and Resources Initiative, supporting collaborators towards securing collective forest tenure rights in Indonesia, India, Nepal, and elsewhere. Natalie, please, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Dazzle, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Greetings in general, wherever you are. It is my pleasure to join you today. I would like to thank all of the delegates and those who opened the floor with us with session 1 and the introductions. It was really a lot of very inspiring remarks and especially I appreciated the references to the COP26 and various other global events that are happening right now, which have direct impacts on this work. And yes, very, very excited to go through the presentation with you today. I will try not to be too long because I know that we have another session in the afternoon to hear from our other colleagues in the region. So please, if you would go to the next slide. So it's wonderful to be here and to be discussing the guidelines on customary tenure. I think it's great that we've arrived to this point. You know, as discussed this morning, this opportunity has been discussed and has been included in the plan of action, working together with the ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry, NTFP-EP, with the Secretariat, with the ASEAN Secretariat as well. And Mrlg is very happy to support our alliance members and the working group on developing these guidelines and to review the outline that will be presented later. So I just want to mention that a regional guidelines together from collectively drafted by regional platforms such as the ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry could really provide opportunities for ASEAN member states and national governments to be in line with international institutions, to have stronger legitimacy and ownership over the securing tenure for customary those who practice customary tenure. Guidelines or you know, protocols or principles on customary tenure could also help increase transparency and accountability, aid in reaching climate and sustainable development targets, as well as improving land management and increasing sustainable production and forest enterprise. So please go to the next slide. You know, just grounding this a little bit in the work of the ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry, securing customary forest tenure is really the foundation for social forestry. So we are so glad to be able to work on this together with ASEAN Secretariat. And something that I'll continue to talk about in this brief presentation today is this: there's no one size fits all solutions, but rather it's we need a holistic approach to, like our presenters in the previous session were mentioning, to really address all of these various issues, and something like a guidelines could do that. Next slide, please. So I'd like to just provide a bit of background. As I mentioned, I'll be discussing particularly customary tenure in the Mekong region. I won't be talking about the rest of ASEAN, although there are some significant legislations and policy in progress in other ASEAN countries as well. We know, we've heard from Bambang this morning, especially about Indonesia, and we know very much, I think Philippines was also mentioned this morning as well. Mrlg has a publication, which is the state of the land in the Mekong region in 2018. And in this publication, we found that the Mekong is undergoing very important economic and demographic transformations, particularly resulting in dramatic changes in land use and land cover in the Mekong region, specifically the loss of traditional and sustainable livelihood and management practices, increased vulnerability to climate shocks, pronounced threats, and not excluding others, but large-scale land investments, and also increasing land under agricultural production. There are high levels of deforestation, and there's also rising migrations. As we heard from our presentations before, secure tenure for communities living in land and forest areas is particularly linked to reducing rates of deforestation and degradation, reducing conflict, lowering carbon emissions, and having higher carbon storage and greater investment in overall forest management. So with the incredibly diverse region like the Mekong, with 70 million people, with over extreme diversity in terms of ethnic groups and communities, it's very important to focus on customary tenure, because customary tenure goes beyond a sort of parceled approach that tenure often has, where there's individual rights over agriculture, and customary tenure really looks at a territory. So next slide, please. We have already had plenty of people sharing the definition of customary tenure, and I'm very glad. Just potentially some key features to keep in mind for the discussion today and tomorrow is that customary tenure practices in the Mekong as well as in ASEAN are very broad, just like the communities themselves, and they're full of diversity. In the Mekong, these practices have often been referred to as the rotational agroforestry systems or shifting cultivation, as well as other traditional land management practices like the existence of spiritual forests and burial forests, just some small examples. These customary tenure practices are practiced on and within very diverse landscapes. This range from agricultural land, grazing areas, water bodies, and forest land. And within these landscapes, there are bundles of different rights that are allocated over different parcels. So different areas of land have different rights. These customary tenure systems contain different bundles or different combination of rights, which we refer to as the spectrum of rights. And I believe when going through the outline and talking about the guidelines, this bundle of rights is really important to keep in mind so that we're able to address each form, each right within that bundle. These rights can often overlap, and they can be granted to individuals or communities and directly linked to the governance of land. Next slide, please. So very quickly, I think it's extremely important, as our other presenters mentioned, addressing gender is critical, and it's critical to address gender when thinking of creating any sort of regional platform or promoting land rights at a regional level, because so often it's forgotten about and it's left as a sort of add-on. Women have particularly unique relationships to land and natural resources and have vast knowledge about these natural resources. And so they're really often the custodians of their land and their customary tenure systems, but rarely have rights over their tenure security. There are quite a few barriers to that, to women being involved. Some barriers include participation and difficulty in having their voice heard in decision-making platforms. This is also often based in existing power dynamic and structures and existing gendered roles. In short, the lack of enabling policies and legislations to secure tenure for women remains to be one of the biggest barriers, including the lack of oversight and accountability by various different government ministries. Next slide, please. So I will provide a an overview of what is happening regionally, and I hope that my colleagues in the afternoon will be able to provide some more detail. I know that we'll be going country through country, but I'd like to start to say that as our colleagues have mentioned, there has been a lot that's happening, and there's a lot more. There are many more policies and legislations in the last 10 years that have acknowledged, or a little bit more than 10 years, that have acknowledged the rights of communities to their land. We need to take those legislations, improve them, but also improve implementation on the ground. So in Cambodia, there are various different options for recognition of customary tenure. Again, this is a sort of parceled approach. One of those options are community land titles, which indigenous communities are eligible to apply for. It's often seen as a very progressive policy in the region, but implementation is complex, expensive, and slow, and has been relatively inaccessible for most indigenous communities. Local communities also aren't eligible for indigenous titles if they're not categorized as indigenous. Under the Protected Areas Law in 2008 in Cambodia, which covers a large part of Cambodia's forest areas, protected areas are zoned into 4 areas for effective management. And in theory, communities should have a limited bundle of rights over their community and sustainable use zone through designation of community protected areas. However, customary tenure practice have not necessarily been included in zoning procedures, so communities often lack their tenure rights. So there are many opportunities in Cambodia to engage in existing legislations and platforms. In Laos, while customary and collective tenure is practiced in forest and other areas, there are over 3,000 villages who are located in forest areas that have had historically few avenues to formalize their customary tenure rights. Planning procedures such as land use planning and village forest management planning, along with the formalization processes that come after that, such as titling for land use planning and village forest management, conservation and contracts for forests, can grant limited rights to communities in forest. However, these processes often fail to grant a robust bundle of rights to the communities. However, in Laos, the newly promulgated land and forest laws provide present incredible opportunities to recognize communities' rights, especially their customary rights, as there are several provisions that actually address customary utilization. So in Myanmar, large areas of land in the country are held through customary tenure, as we heard in the previous presentation. There was, up until this year, there was a shift, probably only in written form, towards acknowledging customary tenure systems by the, as we saw in the national land use policy, where there were specific provisions that called to increase customary tenure recognition. Yet, this has not been operationalized in any legislation. Until this year, there was the drafting process of the national land law, which was actively progressing, and there were dedicated mechanisms in place to include provisions on customary tenure. However, in the meantime, communities are able to ensure they have interim protection measures by conducting customary tenure documentation. Customary tenure documentation is crucial, and as it does provide informal recognition of customary tenure, and this is something that we often talk about at Mrlg. Lastly, in Vietnam, there are quite progressive forest and forest land allocation policies. In fact, in the forest law in 2017, it is the first legislation that recognizes that communities can be forest owners and gives priorities to forest allocation for ethnic communities who have customarily used these forests. So overall, these processes and legislations exist, which is great. And the next step is to address the sort of lacking procedural standards and guidelines and the existing restrictions. So next, I'll go into details about some of these challenges and opportunities. There we go. Yes, thank you. So these are some challenges and opportunities that were highlighted in the Mekong Regional Land Forum. And to quickly go through all of these as a sort of synthesis of the regional overview that I presented in the last slide. Existing policy infrastructure is unclear or incomplete and needs refining and tweaking, but also implementation on the ground. There's a lack of clarity on how to govern overlapping communities and government designated areas. And this is particular to forest areas, for example, in protection, protected and conservation areas, forest areas. There are overlapping mandates between state institutions and lack of public resources. The representation of women and minority groups in policy and legislation remains insufficient. And there are also many difficulties in implementing FPIC. However, the opportunities or the key messages, let's say, that we found from the forum over many discussions are that customary tenure practices are sustainable and can maintain forest and biodiversity. Again, there is no one-size-fits-all solution in adjusting customary tenure, therefore guidelines and guiding principles are necessary. The documentation of customary tenure can lead to increased tenure security for communities who aren't able to access any formalized tenure instrument. A mixed approach is necessary, and what that means is taking various different forms of tenure rights, which is titling or land use planning or documentation, and bringing that together as a parcel, which is fundamental and would be something quite fundamental in a guideline or guiding principles to mention. Communities need rights to productively utilize and benefit such as from their land, such as for revenue and livelihood generations. This is something I believe will be discussed in the upcoming presentation. And women there needs to be an acknowledgement that women contribute significantly to environmental sustainability, conservation, economic development, and customary knowledge. And at the end, communities need to remain the principal agent of forest management, and they need to be part of these conversations. So I hope that this overview gave you some thoughts and sort of got your brain moving to wrap your head around customary tenure and really what it means to potentially have a guideline on the recognition of customary tenure. Next slide, please. So additionally, as Dazzle mentioned in his introduction, we are working on all of these issues in the Regional Customary Tenure Alliance, and NTFP-EP is part of this alliance with RECOF-TC, AIPP, and AFA, along with some the 4 countries here who are the national representatives for our Customary Tenure Alliance. So the regional alliance works on various different things, from research and analysis on FPIC, food security, gender, and legal analysis, and also implements multi-stakeholder dialogues similar like the one we're having today, and collaboration, and provides support with various regional platforms such as ASEAN and ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry, but also has a key focus on gender and mainstreaming gender. Of course, these are just, I wanted to share this with you because there are additional resources, and there will be upcoming research and programmatic work that we hope would contribute to the discussions for the development of a guideline. Of course, Mrlg also has several online publications and research that are available as well, and I can circulate those. And that is all I have for today. I would really like to thank all of you. You can go to the next slide. For being here. I really look forward to the discussions to talk about the outline, and I hope the discussion informed you and gave you some things to think about and to chew on with the upcoming 2 days. Please feel free to contact me if needed. And again, I'm really looking forward to seeing this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Natalie, for that very comprehensive and insightful presentation of the overview of the customary tenure situation, FPIC, in the Mekong, particularly in the Mekong, and the result of the Mekong Regional Land Forum and the work that Mrlg is doing in the Mekong. Also for providing us some opportunities and existing challenges that remain in the region, and what the Regional City Alliance is currently and will be doing in the next few months or even years. We hope to continue the work on customary tenure recognition and hopefully contributing to the development of the regional guideline later on. There are lots of questions, and we thank you for your questions that you place in the chat box. Our resource speakers are trying their best to answer it in the chat box as we ran out of time and we need to continue on with the discussion. So thank you again, Natalie, for joining us this afternoon. Our next speaker would be Attorney Edna Magigad. Attorney Edna Magigad is our regional researcher for CT and FPIC at NTFP-EP. She is a public interest lawyer who has worked with marginalized sectors and local governments on access to justice issues for almost 20 years, 10 years of which was focused on climate change, forest, biodiversity, and indigenous peoples, both at the national, ASEAN, and global level. She has worked with UNDP, FAO, GIZ, World Bank, and NTFP-EP Asia, and GOP-DNR. She also taught environmental law and agrarian reform law in 3 Metro Manila universities. Thank you for joining us, Ms. Edna, and the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dazzle, for that introduction. I'm so happy to be here and would also like to acknowledge the presence of our esteemed colleagues from the ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry and our colleagues, partners from Mrlg, and of course, from our team, from the NTFP-EP as well as AFA and the country researchers who did good work on this country research, and a lot of them have summarized, most of them have summarized and called into this presentation. So it was Point from Myanmar, Sipo from Cambodia, Pan Nature from Vietnam, and Laudra from Laos. Next slide, please. Okay. So just to provide the regional context for customary tenure, as of now, we don't have any overarching policy framework for the recognition of customary tenure or the exercise of FPIC at the regional level. If you can, based from ASEAN relationship over the past decades of its existence, land and natural resources are treated as national sovereign matter covered by the principle of non-intervention, which is actually very core to the ASEAN relationship and engagement among the ASEAN member states. But you know, as there are borders, as more indigenous people's lands are being encroached, and we are expanding into areas where they're pristine forested areas due to population and also the demands of our society. Now it's not a matter of treating it as a national sovereign matter, but maybe providing some guidance at national governments, for national governments, in a voluntary basis, on a social contract or a moral basis, to really look into the issue of how land and natural resources are connected with indigenous people, local communities, meaning forest-dependent communities, farmers, and smallholders in our forested landscape. Even though there is no overarching policy framework, we can see that from the ASEAN framework for the ASEAN vision for the FAP sector, that is the forestry, that is the food for agriculture and forestry sector, and with its subsector, the social forestry subsector, they have provided some vision into how we all should go, how national governments, CSO, and private sector and stakeholder should also treat this kind of matter. So later on, I will present that even despite that no overarching policy framework, there are existing policy developments that we see are also very important in this aspect. Okay, as we see from the different, studies, as well as what Natalie from Mrlg has emphasized, the results of the policy process in some countries is not consistent with how indigenous people and local communities' rights to customary tenure and the exercise of FPIC should be recognized. So it is, they recognize certain portion, but because they're from our level, from the level of the government and ASEAN, there has been no systematic assessment of customary tenure. Recognition and importance of tenure and food security is not well developed, and the connection of this unique relationship between indigenous people, local communities on with land and natural resources. Next, please. We are also kind of bogged down by the colonial history of some of our countries, particularly in Mekong. So their land administration systems and legal frameworks were largely developed during the time of colonial period. There are reforms, but these are like basic core laws, and it would take time before national legislation would really pick up to the level of what it should be and what we aspire to be. It usually favors the elite and perpetuate the invisibility of local communities. And among the local communities, the most marginalized would be some indigenous people who are not identified, not into the census, or not given citizenship. But as I said earlier, we are going into this pristine, peaceful, and simple, but really rich areas. So conversion for commercial agriculture, due to liberalization of foreign investment, opening up of economies, they have this new economic framework wherein it's thinking of land as an economic asset without looking at land holistically as it belongs to certain communities and attached to certain knowledge and practices. And in the past years, particularly with carbon projects, RED+, you see a lot of the studies at the national level of the drivers of deforestation point out to indigenous people's practice on shifting cultivation without even having nuance or a scientific study between unsustainable traditional farming to those sustainable and the real traditional farming. So, but within this context of a marginalized sector of the community and indigenous people is further marginalization of women, because as we don't recognize customary law and rights, these are really overwhelmingly more important to women than men. And I will discuss it later. But in the past, there has been a lot of opening. I think past years, you have private business and big funding coming in saying tenure is good for business. You have responsible investment discussion that have emerged in the last 5 years. And you have now a lot of voluntary guidelines. And these are also opportunities wherein ASEAN can also look into. Next. So straight into the findings. But before that, as I mentioned earlier, it's the social forestry subsector who has that vision, as I can see from the many recommendations they put forward in the past years. That is the vision, the protection of customary tenure rights, even the development of FPIC guidelines, particularly as a safeguards in climate change, forest landscape restoration project, and a lot more. So in the past 10 years, I think from 2009, 12, 11, 2015, 2017, I think our AMS from the social forestry have been rock star in terms of really having this difficult conversation of how we can actually recognize rights of communities and even begin to talk about FPIC in government programs and development programs. And so they put forward those recommendations. I hope you can see in the screen, and also facilitated 2 major ASEAN guidelines. And these major ASEAN guidelines, voluntary in nature, but still would have that moral and social obligation to abide with, no? So you have the ASEAN guidelines on responsible investment in food, agriculture, and forestry in 2018. And of course, more specific to the forestry sector, the ASEAN Agroforestry Guidelines. And this particular one, guidelines has three principles recognizing customary tenure, forest tenure reform, and rights of indigenous communities as well as local communities. Next, please. Next. So let me go into the findings from the various studies. So this is a summation or collation of all the stories, the lessons learned, as well as also findings from the CSO Forum on Social Forestry. So there are no national laws, regulation, policies that recognize customary tenure of communities. Also there are, but often these are not fully aligned to the actual use practices on the ground, because it gives only portions of the areas, it gives limited and restricted right. Unlike, of course, except for the Philippines, so the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act provide 4 bundle of rights and 36 specific rights to Indigenous people in terms of the land, resources, culture, water, right to technology, right to intellectual property rights. So it's 36 specific rights. So the policy is also not supported by an implementation mechanism and administrative mechanism as well. So you have, as Natalie mentioned, you have very, very good policy, particularly in the recent years from this Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, and Vietnam countries, but it has not been to the point of operational with mechanism where to, who monitors, what are these safeguards, etc. Okay, policy is not supported by an implementation mechanism, as said earlier, and there's the absence of platform or coordinating mechanism at the national level. So to just address common issues, because these are issues that are actually very difficult, very complex. So if you invite, they should invite Indigenous peoples, local community leaders to just share to them some thoughts, and maybe we can really move forward with that. So because we still lack inclusive representation of communities in the decision-making bodies in forestry, agriculture, and even in food security. Next, please. So as we really problematize on what policy and administrative issues, everyday cases of encroachment in customary land and forest really threaten the rights and the life of these communities, because even in government-supported investment, where you have an EIA, which all the countries, you know, have in their, it's the most advanced in terms of consultation, participation, but also the most compromised and the most compromised, corruption ridden as well in some parts, and community plans and priorities are not really taken into consideration, even though in the policy it requires a social assessment and a consultation. So the right to provide or withhold FPIC is not really respected. That the right is actually a right to say yes or no, or the right to define the condition and benefit sharing arrangement. But that is because the governments have not facilitated easily documentation of certain evidence that provides the community like a safeguard that yes, I am kind of like the possessor, if not the owner of this chunk of land, and it includes this much trees, these agriculture areas, etc. There's also absence of support from government agency, while civil society support is limited due to the complex of issue and the geography of these communities. There is no common model or approach for promoting the recognition of customary tenure, unlike that of social forestry, except for the Philippines. Well, social forestry has really rocketed in terms of, you know, targets, countries meeting the targets, really good coordination from regional to national level to that in different forms. But aside from social forestry, really some customary tenure issues and recognition are also left out. And these are also with regards to some communities and some indigenous people. Next. In terms of food security and livelihood, we have to emphasize that there has been many findings that for communities, livelihood and food security are really closely intertwined with customary tenure. The main source of their food and income, the grains, those vegetables, those livestock, they are really part and incorporated in how they manage this customary land and domain. So if you take away or there's not recognized that, it's stunted or it's actually destroyed. And our targets, SDG target, national target of food security and nutrition are really compromised. So if you speak on a national, on a government way to say, it's also good for them to really have clear policy towards this, as well as coherent across not only the forestry sector, but the environment and the agriculture sector. So any challenge to the use of the customary land really poses risk to their ability to produce food and generate income to their needs. And please take note that is also our food in the cities as well as in the other more advanced rural communities. And of course, it impacts on the kind of food and nutrition that is being given to them. So the wide variety of food available to communities within this customary tenure are also the diet makes them, these resources provide them a diverse diet and a nutrition-centered food security. So if you take that away, then this would really impact on the health of our next generation, as well as the health of the community that protects a vital source of our ecosystem. To balance it out, the environmental issue is also very clear here. Next, please. International policies and agreements like the Paris Agreement, all that really provide some MP2 for programs, for governments to recognize them. In particularly in Mekong, Red Plus was a door opener, is a door opener because it's still going on with FPIC in Vietnam and Myanmar. They're pushing for a policy guidelines. Their submission, the national government submission to the UNFCCC portal on Red Plus, there's safeguard information system submission, which is actually a summary of the information, how they would address safeguards, which Cancun safeguards in all eligible activities of Red Plus is laid down, and it showed that they have plans for recognition of customary tenure and FPIC. And of course, in the past year, you have the Green Climate Fund that IP policy, recognized city and required FPIC, and USAID with its new pro-IP policy. It stands for something this year. Okay, so if aside from that, at the national level, there is also a lot of movement in terms of corporate approach from land concession to more social forestry areas, driven by the social forestry work and target, but as well as other areas as well with moratorium, Paris Agreement. They're now looking into ecosystem services, etc. So you have indigenous community conserved areas, not just protected areas. This is where in protected areas and highly valued biodiversity areas, you can have ICCAs. So, so these are just some of it. My few last slide, next please. So in terms of FPIC, from the studies, FPIC is not really known and understood. The concept of customary, and second to that, the concept of customary tenure and how it relates or not relate to FPIC. So this is not very clear from the government side, even the CSO side, and some aspect in the community. Consultation and consent are sometimes almost all the time from what I read. not differentiated. There's the country's mechanism for consultation of community is more defined in EIA, but there are reported violations. So when there's no clear rules, what programs, what project and activities impacting on land and natural resources have consultation requirement or have consent or FPIC requirements. Except for the Philippines, I have applied for like 10 or led 10 FPIC process in the Philippines. So it's kind of also bureaucratic, a little bit problematic in the past 20 years. So maybe a simplified one, just being inspired by the Philippines would be really good. But we have advanced in terms of the bureaucratic level because we have FPIC is a legal and statutory requirement, and without an FPIC, a corporation, a project, a CSO can be ordered anytime, and we can be paid for damages, etc. So it's kind of that level. Existing benefit sharing arrangement of communities to investment groups are not equitable and monitored in areas where there are no FPIC requirements or even recognition of customary tenure. Next, please. So further for recommendation is also emphasize recognizing the diverse, unique, and life-giving relationship of indigenous people and local communities to these resources, supporting local communities to also identify themselves, claim this uniqueness to the government, but government may provide some approach towards this. And of course, in the context of national development, harmonized visioning of the community goals with government goals. And in the process, there's a need to recognize diversity of tenure system. As Natalie mentioned, no size fits all, and it's really diverse. And because that's also the diversity of the country and the diversity of ASEAN, that we should really push or recognize it and really revel on our diversity. Next, please. So a dedicated unit is always emphasized. It can be a unit or like not like a big unit, but something to hold on, to be a fulcrum of the institutional coordination, so that it would also pave the way for inclusion in public policy of communities and clear modalities for participation. Recognizing also sustainable shifting cultivation, traditional land use practices, because that is the way they gather food. Unless we cannot invent ways, and this is part of recognition. And we can do better by looking at how to enhance forest and agrobiodiversity, but looking at the multifunctionality on landscape and people and their resources, way of gathering resources and practicing resources should be recognized and integrated into land use planning. And this one has been there from the CSO, from the ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry, recommendation to the ASEAN higher level bodies to ensure procedural equity in land use decision making. Next, please. And on gender, so as I mentioned earlier, women are marginalized, but very important to understand why, because it's not a simple marginalization. Women and men, they have different ways to relate to these resources because of traditional gender roles. Men are, as if you can see that in dwindling forest resources and non-recognition impacts women more, because women's roles usually are tied up to certain customary rules that are patriarchal. And if you can see also that they're also tied up to resources that are really soft, say women, like NTFPs, fodder, but for men, it's the land. So when there's a collective issuance of title to a community, then it will be changed to individual. It usually happen, they have home lots aside from the communal, and they define their communal areas. Then those that would be sure to have titles would be men, and women are not. And of course, they are more entrepreneurial. They can also have leadership roles, and because their relationship to the community are also tied with their relationship to men as daughters and as wives. So we have to look into that dynamics so that we can really have a gender responsive tenure reform across the national government and across ASEAN. Next, please. I think this would be my last slide. So develop inclusive framework, sustainable investment, because investment is really in this forest. And how do we even make it sustainable and inclusive investment, and to make sure that communities also benefit financially from this. When I say benefit financially, it's not just laborers. So we have case studies that show that communities are contented because of this investment, because they have work, etc. But that is different. Benefiting financially can be two-tiered, wherein you can benefit from the use of that resource because you have taken care of that resource, right? For decades or hundreds of centuries, hundreds of years, or not centuries. Capacity building. So this is my last slide. But on top of that, all of us would need also capacity building to support this kind of vision of recognizing tenure, customary tenure, and exercise of FPIC. This was really raised by most of the country researchers, that community organizing at the level of these communities is very important, vital. So it's a non-negotiable thing, because customary tenure and FPIC are not only dependent on official recognition, by voluntary guidelines, by CSO having a lot of programs on this, but also how the community will really come together and really fight for their rights, understand what is at stake, and this requires a solid community organizing system. Thank you very much, and I'm so glad to share these findings with you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Edna. I think you covered quite a lot, not only for the regional research, but also the country researches that we are currently that are currently ongoing. And I like that you were able to provide recommendations on how do we go forward with a regional customary tenure recognition framework to further strengthen the ongoing work on the ground on customary tenure recognition. There are lots of interactions in the chat, and I would encourage our resource speakers and audience and participants to just put in the chat box and maybe for the resource speaker respond to some of the questions and discussions in the chat, as we try to keep to the time and move forward to the next session. But before that, I would like to call on a short intervention from Sefa Taudi. Sefa is a representative of the ICCA Southeast Asia Consortium Youth, and also a member of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. Tech team, can you put her on spotlight? Thank you, Sefa, for joining. We would like to hear from you at the regional level on, after hearing presentations from Edna and Natalie, on your perspective on how youth can be engaged in this discussion on customary tenure recognition and FPIC. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Dazzle. My name is Sefa Taudi. I'm an Ibaloy Kangkanay Igorot from the Cordillera region in the Philippines. I can also see that there's a very important discussion happening on the chat. My intervention would kind of just speak to something like this, wherein I just want to add to this discussion that free prior informed consent falls really under this bigger discussion of self-determination. I think FPIC is an expression of self-determination, which is this right of indigenous peoples to, to freely determine our development socially, economically, and culturally on our own terms and at our own pace. And so policies regarding free prior informed consent and also customary tenure should really be crafted in a way that puts self-determination at the center and doesn't take that away. I think we can say that free prior informed consent is successful really when indigenous peoples themselves control the process of the negotiations. And this is not often the case because of the power imbalances that exist. We also know FPIC is successful when customary land tenure is secure, and this is also not the case in so many places in Asia unnecessarily. And then we also know it's successful when communities benefit actually from the project that's going to be carried out. And so it's unfortunate that we sometimes have to specifically qualify FPIC sometimes, like saying we need genuine free prior informed consent. But that's the way it is because obstacles really are happening at the national level. And I know this is going to be discussed further in the following session, but obstacles really do happen, like manipulating the process, like producing fake organizations or fake indigenous leaders or bribery or corruption and things like this. But what they emphasize about this is that these are not really problems of free prior informed consent itself, but they're rather problems of lack of free prior informed consent. And just as a final point, free prior informed consent is also more than just a consultation and a means to get a yes or a no even. It's really a bigger process. It should be a bigger process of building consensus among the community. And this includes, of course, involvement of all members of the community, most especially youth and women, who, of course, face intersections with regards to the barriers to being able to participate in decision-making. And it all really boils down to implementation on the ground. And yeah, making sure that everyone has the right access to education, to information, the right financial and logistical resources, and that we actually do recognize indigenous people's collective rights to land. Yes, I'll just end my short intervention there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sefa, for that very enlightening intervention and really putting self-determination at the center of the FPIC process is indeed very important. And it's you cannot consider city as successful and secure if FPIC is unsuccessful. So thank you for your intervention. We would like to go on with the next session. Maybe we go straight to the next session already as we are running short of time. I give the floor now to my colleague, Attorney Edna Magiga, to facilitate the session 3. Ms. Edna.
Thank you very much, Dazzle. So I would like to directly give the floor to the first discussant, Buni from Cambodia, from SIPO, in the sharing of country-level status, challenges, and opportunities, and further detailing some of the aspects that we have Natalie and I have discussed earlier. Buni from Cambodia.
Could I share the screen? I cannot share the screen.
Can you see the screen?
Yeah, well, I want to share the screen. But,
you can minimize it.
I think you can share when
oh, okay.
Share screen.
Okay, do you see my screen? Oh, sorry.
Yes.
It's a problem here.
Yes.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for allowing me for participate in this very important workshop. And I'm Bun Hieng, and I belong to Indigenous Kui from Cambodian Indigenous People Organization, and I'm the technical advisor. And the presentation that I'm about to present today is I have 4 main topics. A little bit brief about SIPO and what we are doing, and a bit about the customary tenure and EPIC and its recognition by current policy and practice in Cambodia, the challenge, gap, and opportunity for the recognizing customary tenure and applying EPIC in Cambodia, and also with the key recommendation. Yeah. So brief about SIPO, we are an indigenous organization. So we established in 2014. We are managed and run by all the indigenous people from various backgrounds. And our vision is we want to see the indigenous people in Cambodia have self-determination on the development and conservation within the multicultural society of Cambodia, because indigenous people is also one of the key component for the whole society Cambodia. So yeah, and we have our own way of working and customary. And our mission for the SIPO is to strengthen the capacity and support the strategic initiative of the IP, especially on land and natural resource management, conservation of identity and culture, and also the socio-economic development for our indigenous people also. Yeah, talking about the customary and EPIC, I'm sure from our discussion this afternoon, we all talked a lot already about the customary tenure and EPIC, and some speaker have already mentioned about a little bit like the brief situation within each country this afternoon. But I just would like to add a little bit more in terms of in Cambodia, because my presentation is more only on indigenous people. That's based on our study and case study, and also the review. We found that in Cambodia we have a lot of law, legislation, regulation, and also the policy that recognize and protect the land, natural resource, and the right of indigenous community. And also, but unfortunately, those laws are not yet really fully aligned to the our indigenous customary land use or practice. It's only like partially recognized. And we see that there are several forms of the tenure form available in Cambodia. For example, like the CLT, the communal or collective land title, CPA, the community protected area, CF, the community forestry, and the CFI is community fishery. And in terms of and within all of this form, there are different tenure recognition. Yeah. And in terms of the EPIC, there's no term used yet in the current policy and law in Cambodia. There are a lot of term that uses more like the consultation, where the decision is mainly rely on the decision maker or the policy maker. I'll go a little bit on the each form, just brief. And in terms of the collective land title, you may be aware of it. It's in terms of the ownership and access right. The government really recognize only 5 types of land for the indigenous community, which is like the resident land, actual farmland, shifting cultivation land, sacred forest, and buried site. And the ownership is not private. Actually, it's still belong to the public land within the ownership for the collective land title. And in terms of right to be consulted and EPIC in this CLT, of course, there's no mention about the free, prior, and informed consent process in the CLT itself, only the consultation along the way. And it's been, in the practice, they are always different between what the community claim about their customary land use, and then what the end result of the collective land title, which is coming in a lot of reduction in terms of the size, because at the end, the government will give to our indigenous community only 5 types of land. Therefore, there are some land which has to be cutting off from the customary land use. If you are going through the collective land title process. Yeah. So if you compare between the, we call it preliminary mapping and the actual certificate to giving the land, there's a big difference in terms of the land size. And the community forestry, in terms of ownership, it still belongs to the state, and it recognizes the traditional right on using the forest within the boundary, within the very strictly following guideline by Forestry Administration, or Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fishery. Actually, based on in the law itself, also take over some of our indigenous people right, especially the customary land use, because indigenous people have to follow different rule which is imposed by the government, especially the forestry law that already mentioned about the term and limitation that you can access. And there's no FPIC has been integrated into this law also, and the community have to follow a lot of guidelines over there. But there's consultation process in order to get the community forestry. So basically community will receive the amount of land for the community forestry based on the decision of the government. But there are still some, I think they normally, practically in the Cambodia, when the community requests for the community forestry, normally there's not much cut from the land. Normally they will give almost all the land or forest area that the community requested. It's different from the CLT, where you claim a lot of land and at the end they give only like 5 types of land. So with the CF, community forestry, it's normally you get from what your request. Yeah. And the same with
I'll give you 1 to 2 minutes to wrap up.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the forest protected area. So this one also very similar to the CF, but only the jurisdiction is under the Ministry of Environment, and the same. There's no EPIC, and there's a lot with the protected CPA. There are even more restriction to our indigenous people in terms of how you use and manage the area, because it still belongs to the government, the public land, state land, and also there's a lot of restriction over here. And for the community forestry, it's very similar form, tenure form, but under the forestry administration of fishery administration of the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fishery. In terms of the challenge and gap opportunity, I think we have the law already exists in the country. Even the law is not yet fully recognize our indigenous people customary tenure or land use, but there's already some that it can be an entry point for the discussion in terms of to rely the whole idea of the customary tenure for indigenous people, which is the collective land title, not only the 5 types of land. And in terms of EPIC, it's still very sensitive, as it's commonly understood by the policymaker or the decision maker that EPIC process can always hinder or slow the government decision on the development project. And even the current draft law on environmental code also, there are a lot of consistently requested by CSO to include the term, but at the end there's no term there, only the consultation instead. And the recommendation is that the customary tenure is important, also recognized by the law, but community strong solidarity participation is really also one of the important, because if they are strong, they are still able to uphold, respect, and protect their customary land, even the law is not yet recognized. We found that in some area, community can recognize themselves as the territory for managing the land, and even the law is not yet recognized. And there should be a revitalization of the customary land and natural resource practice, because this is not only contributing to the IP way, but also contributing to the environment. And then it should be recognized and scaling up. It should be the strengthening the indigenous people representation, so that they can move on in terms of for the discussion on to recognize the fully recognize the customary tenure of the indigenous people, because it is important. The full recognition is important, and there should be like promote the multi-stakeholder dialogue, especially between the indigenous people, government agency, CSO, and private sector, so that they can understand each other, and then to include and respect indigenous people customary land as well as the EPIC. We see the UN mechanism also some key that can be support in the EPIC and customary tenure also. And if the private sector also one of the key component to have, if they have willingness to do that, because they have normally it have the more powerful because of the money there. Yeah. So yeah, that's my presentation. I'm stopping now here.
Thank you, Buning. Thank you, Buning. So we truly appreciate that you really distill between the three kinds of customary tenure formally recognized now. In Cambodia, you have the CLT, you have the CPA, and the one on fisheries, CFI. Thank you. So because of the lack of time, I will go straight and would not entertain question. I would go straight to our presentation from Lao. Avakat is an independent consultant from the Mrlg project in Lao. I'll give the floor to you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, first I would like to thanks to give me an opportunity to share some of the my work related to my work in from the present projects of Mrlg project. Yeah, I have a presentation here. Okay, so the same topic. Actually, this is a different two topics, quite different things. That's why I may be a separate one. I will talk about the customary tenure, and then after that discuss about the EPIC in Laos. In Laos, according to actually in the new land law, also recognize the customary tenure in Laos as well. But in the second paragraph of the Lao land law, state that while the land registration not yet to be conducted in the for insurance individual land title, state recognize and protect the customary land use rights of the person or proceeds with the title registration according to the law. This statement is actually there is only the this article mentions about the customary tenure directly. That's why in this article of the Lao land law, quite clear that the context of the customary tenure in Laos is about every plot of land that not yet registered as not received the formal land registrations. It means like the people in the even the rural area or even the Vientiane capital, some of them who not yet have any land registration, they may consider as the customary tenure. But the process that allow who can certify the tenures of these people. It's like in the present regulation, they still allow the village head to help the community or the people to certify this is the land of the people in the community. But in the actions so far, in Laos, many types of land, like in the there are forests. The people are living in the forest area. Sometimes they do shifting cultivation. It might be a forest area or agriculture, or even some people grow because in Laos have really fast land use change in recently. That's why some people already clear forest area and grow rubber tree in the area. So far, they don't have any document. So it means like they still have a customary tenure. And it's still a question that this land are recognized by the law yet or not, but it's still unclear. And then it's not really, we could not 100% say that this is already secure. But in the nature of the people, like in many area in Laos, land channels is still managed by the local people. They have their own way of managing the land. That's why in recognized the customary tenure in Laos, it should be some way that to respect the community manage the land or secure the tenure rights of the customary use of the people. But it's not only the certain document that giving to the people that this is the people lands. It's about the culture and then the respecting the way of the people manage, because sometimes land is not belong to the individual. It belong to the community, like a forest area. It could not so far we don't have any process to keep the land title in the forest area. That's why, or it's belong to the community land. That's why so far the way of recognition in the forest area is still not so clear, but respecting the communities, the way of the communities to manage the land is maybe a good solutions, or maybe it's maybe a case in Laos. Also, Mrlg trying now to promote the pilot project that to produce a guideline and sub legislation on land registration. But this is working with DOL, with the Department of Land, to help to make a clear process of the registration of the land inside the forest area. And then it might have another type of land like a forest area. The people living in the forest area, how they can do in this. So there are also many tools so far that were developed by different sector, like land use planning. Actually, land use planning in Laos is where in charge by Department of Land, belong to the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment. And also another tool about agricultural land is like the tool is participatory agricultural land management. This is belong to the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, and also collective land agriculture, collective agriculture land management also belong to the Ministry of Agriculture. And there is another tool related forests, is about the village forest management planning agreement and or contracts. This is also a new tool that were also developed by the Department of Forestry. That's why so far there are many new tools, because in Laos land law just land law so far, forest law and land law is still very new. It was approved and declared in 2019, so just recently. And then the other guideline is need to be developed together. It's also part of the Mrlg now trying to adopt the tool in different, because we have a pilot project, and then this pilot trying to capture in different type of land use in our target area, and then try to draw a lesson from formulating different type of land documents, so to help secure the land tenures in the area. And also with this lesson, that's why we try to facilitate the development of sub-accreditation of the government sector. That's why
Please,
in
1 minute, 2 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's why this is the process that allow is ongoing to develop the customary tenures. In terms of the free prior informed consent in Laos, this is actually is a new tool. A development it is a development tool that just developed in the actually there is another thing is about the responsible agriculture investment. This is also a new thing that also adopts in Laos, and FPIC now were integrate using with the II responsible agriculture investment together. Is get along with each other very well. Like if you are an investor and then you try to use FPIC, you inform them information. You give them the sufficient information and then try to have the consent from the community. Because if your investment related to natural resources, you need to engage with the consent of the community. That's why so far the FPIC is now ongoing to develop into the development sector that have working with the community's engagement or private sector, mostly, not really broadly, but also many NGO or donors also trying to support Laos to make a requirement that people should the project should use FPIC as a tool to implement, to engage with the community as well. That's why so far they're starting to have a tool or guidelines for implementation, but it's still not yet an official use in Laos. It's also still a pilot thing in some case, and then I think in the future they may have successful results and then become a official tool to use in Laos. So in the this is about the FPICs and customary tenure. I make a very comprehensive discussions to you. I hope is at least make some clear vision for you to think about the situation in Laos. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Avakat. And I see a very lively chat box, and the one raised by Roger is very good to take note of. But I will continue, and I will not read. I will continue because we are pressed with time. I would now continue and go to Myanmar, which we know is the country is facing a lot of political troubles and lots of efforts on RED+, FPIC, and CT. Might have slide down, so I'll give the floor to EE. So it's EE. the Director of Point Promotion for Indigenous Nature Together. The virtual floor is yours, EE.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be part of the team until now, because since this year changes in our country politics, we have stopped almost all activity now and everything. But it's good to be in touch with all the people in the region and still learning about the progress and things happening in other countries as well, to encourage ourselves and to empower ourselves of something for our country future as well. First of all, I would like to highlight a bit of our country context. Is like maybe similar to other country in Asia, that the first thing with us is like there is no proper recognition of indigenous people rights in the country, although we are the country voted in favor of UNDRIP. So when we're trying to advocate for customary land tenure and FPIC, then there is a barrier just to start finding out the open door to discuss about IP rights, because although customary land tenure is broadly defined for indigenous people, customary land tenure is very much important for their life and their culture, their identity, their livelihood, everything on it. No, and FPIC in my understanding is that a tool, a very important open up of negotiation on things happen and activity that will carry out on the customary land tenure. FPIC is very important in order to prevent conflict and also bring about peace and open up dialogue so that we can have sustainable development for the country. But starting with a lack of recognition of indigenous people rights mentioned in the UNDRIP, and there is also no customary land tenure recognition at the country, and only started open up the space along with the national land use policy, and there is a national land law process. FPIC is not yet in place in our country, although there might have a kind of consultation. There is no real FPIC happened to date, although it is very much important for a country like us in Myanmar. Sometimes we are thinking like there is a need of more political will in order to make changes in our country, but we're trying to solve those problems in a technical way and in all possible way. However, whatever we have done, like us in Myanmar, we have done a lot of documentation on the current status of indigenous people, customary land tenure practices, and what are the gap in law and policy, things like that. Together with Mrlg as well, we have done a lot of assessment and evaluation, how to assessment and research on those things. This kind of thing in any time when changes occur again in the country and open up door, then these finding from our study will stay valid. That is the thing I can be sure of. These are the things that doesn't disappear, although some spaces to collaborate more in the law and policy process are not open up at the moment or shut down at the moment. These are the lasting result we have in our hand as part of contribution to the country changes in this sector, in this respect of work. No. Another thing is like the challenges still remain the same because of those needed to have changes in the legal system. However, what is not changed until today, since the beginning of all our advocacy started, no, is the community living in nature, the community who has customary land tenure practices, the community who practice customary law, and they are there in their respective community. Whatever happened to the country, whatever challenges faced in the country, they are still there. they will continue their way of living. They will continue their way of protecting of natural environment and things like that. This is the thing that that hasn't changed amid the challenges. I can see this as an opportunity as well. If we have community who is still strong and trying to live in a way to taking care of natural environment and trying to promote their role in relation to their customary land tenure, then in the future, we might have a space on that to discuss and to have more dialogue on recognition of this customary land tenure and actual implementation and practice of FPIC in the country. Because I think we learn a lot from other countries, like in Philippines, like in Indonesia, Thailand. Every country in the region can be a good example, and we can also take lesson learned from them in order to prepare for the future of our country. And we can also take the lesson learned that things like FPIC actually can promote the peace and stability and avoid conflict, no? But we don't have those kind of mechanism in place that can also create like this kind of political instability of the country in the long run. So in the future, we hope to have these kind of mechanism in place for our country. And I would like to also highlight two recommendations that in terms of customary land, there shall, whatever investment or whatever development project activity coming into in the place of customary land tenure, they shall undergo local, national, and sub-national stakeholder consultation consistent with applicable domestic and international standard. Sometimes we have to say international standard as well when we don't have domestic one. In relation to public participation, local community and indigenous people, and ensuring compliance with the free, prior, and informed concerns of indigenous people is very much crucial, especially for the country like in Myanmar. And they should also have a grievance mechanism along with FPIC so that we can really sustain peace, stability, and living in harmony with the nature for indigenous community of the country. There's a little bit of sharing. Maybe I don't have a lot because of the current country context, but I do hope to keep in touch with all of you, try all, trying to engage and hope for the best future for our country as well. Thank you.
Thank you, EE. That is a very heartwarming message. And of course, good to know that despite the political turmoil in the country, the communities remain some secured and peaceful, I would say that. So thank you. Yes, so let me continue to the presentation from Vietnam. I now call on Kim, Lee Ting Kim Can, sorry, from Pan Nature. Sorry, Miss Kim, for if I didn't pronounce your name properly. So the floor is yours.
Should I share the screen from my, yeah, I can do it now. Does anyone can see my screen now?
It's not yet appearing. Maybe it's just slow, but you are indeed screen sharing. But it's still.
I think there's some problem with my computer. Can you still hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you, Kim. Maybe we can just be the one to share this screen. Okay with you?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Is this you're sharing, right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Okay. My name is Kim Ngan, but you can call me Kim. It's okay. Normally my name is a little bit difficult to say for foreigners. It's my pleasure to be a part of Pan-Asia team to have the study on customary tenure and ethic in Vietnam. And today I would like to share some of the findings from the studies to present for the situation in Vietnam. Next slide, please. Yeah, and you can see the figure here is the approach, the holistic approach that we used, and it's also the way how we try to take a look at customer tenure in Vietnam. Like we have to consider it under the national institution and also the traditional custom of the local community, and also put it in the context of climate change, changes in technologies and infrastructure, the market economy, and the changes in the national policies and law. In Vietnam, there's no concept of indigenous people because in national law and constitution, everyone is treated the same, and everyone have the same rights and responsibilities over the natural resources, including land and forest. So we consider the customary tenure in mountainous communities living in the forest landscape as their self-governing institutions. Next, please. Yeah, and there are two main types of village that distinguishably define the customary tenure in Vietnam. We have a traditional village with a very long history, and it was formed for decades ago, and it clearly clarified the characteristic of an indigenous communities with mutual support and health. And the villagers are normally from only one ethnicity, or a majority of the villagers are from only one ethnic group. They maintain a very strong customary system with the village elders, clan heads managing the customary laws, and until today they still maintain traditional rules and mutual agreement among the community members. However, with a very long traditions history, with different periods of economic and also political situations, there are a lot of other villages established under the new economic program and new migration program, which was formed within only around 150 years back, and because it includes a lot of migrants, it mixed in culture and ethnicity. That's the reason why the characteristic of an indigenous communities are not clear in those villages. Instead, there's authoritarian management system, as the village head, which is not elected, who is not elected by the community, and the mass union, who's supposed to be the representative of farmers, women, the veterans, but actually have a very strong influence from the commune level government. And the village management is carried out according to the state law. Next, please. Yeah, and we also have to consider the customary tenure in Vietnam in relation with the outsiders context, such as the pressure from a pro-development attitudes of the government, Vietnamese government. The changes in infrastructure lead to a village becoming not a rural area with outsiders, but also connection among different villages. The science and technology advance and also information and technology that overshadow the indigenous knowledge the commodity market versus the market that's only to serve the household needs before climate change, global environmental issue, and most recently the COVID-19. And those situation is put the customary tenure in Vietnam in a bundle of rice, as here we consider the customer tenure in Vietnam in through due process, the duration, the exclusion, the management right, the withdrawal right, and the rights of access. Sorry, I won't be really quick here, but if you have any more question on this one, please put on the chat box. Next, please. Yeah, and the free, prior, and informed consent in Vietnam was first defined in quite too long by the Communist Party of Vietnam in 1986 with a statement: people know, people discuss, people do, and people check. However, not until 2007, the Grassroots Democracy Ordinance provides the specific requirements on the contents that must be informed, discussed, decided by local people, and consulted. And FPIC also clarified in the forestry programs such as the RED Plus and the payments for forest environmental system, environmental services, agricultural developments, and land use change program. However, it is in reality is very limited in force. Because the free factor in FPIC is not ensured, as people are not free to be consulted, to be speak, to voice up their concern. And during the FPIC process in Vietnam, there's no traditional institution taken into account, and also there's no representation of communities traditionals like the village elders, the clans head, the shaman, or something like that in the FPIC. In reality, in Vietnam, only the administrative system are joined by village head and also the mass organization representative who actually were not elected by the local community. And we also have a very weak gender mainstreaming in Vietnam, and they consider it's very unnecessary issues to be integrated. And there are many other weaknesses in the FPIC practical in Vietnam, practice in Vietnam, like the formal, it just rather like a formal process rather than an actual integration in decision making, and sometimes it plays no role in the final decisions, and especially in the context of pro-development orientation of both central and local government. And also for the local government and local communities, they have a very different attitude toward the consensus and also the democracy. They think that this is just a formal process, and they think it play no roles to raise their voice, and they just follow the decisions that are imposed from top down. Next, please. There's three key policies in Vietnam that recognize the customer tenures and FPIC in Vietnam. First of all, the land law in 2003 and 2013 are a very important policy that define the customer tenure, because it starts to allocate the land to local communities for the purpose of agricultural production and aquaculture. And up to 2018, there are 8% of Vietnam's forest land are allocated to local community. However, most of those are degraded land, degraded forests, or just very poor forests. So the purpose of allocate for community just to use the forest, not to protect it. However, there's some limitation in this one, and I shall discuss in the next slide. The land laws also, sorry, not the next slide, previous one, please. Can you move? Yeah, the land laws also considers and recognize the, consider and recognize by the land law the traditional culture of ethnic communities in using lands, and the land law also require FPIC process for when formulating the land use plans at national and provincial and also district level with different different level of requirements, like some for online publishing information only, but some require also direct consultation. For the law and forestry, they also start to, in 2017, already start to respect the living space, the custom, the traditions of local communities, and the very new regulations is that they recognize the sanctuary forest as special forest and the water resource protection forest as protection forest. And the local people have the right to use those forests for their family purposes. And that law also prioritizes the forest allocation for to communities with customs, traditions, religions, and spiritual values in connections with forests. And that law requires consultation in case of formulating national forestry planning and through public consultation. The law on environmental protection in 2020 clarified the community as a forest owner. So every development activities, projects that have the impacts on the community will have to consult the community during the EIA process. However, in reality, that process also have a lot of weaknesses that I have just discussed in the FPIC slides. Next, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, and I shall discuss some challenges to apply the customer tenure in practice of natural resources management and use. For institutionally, the land allocation actually recognize the forest, the community as a forest users, but haven't taken into account any of the traditional custom during the land allocation process. The newly legally recognized traditional forests as sanctuary forests and water resource protection forests are not clearly defined, and their lack of detailed guidance to apply in practice. And actually, even though they recognize those two types of traditional forests, there's no actual integration between administrative institution and traditional management practice. And in forest protection and patrolling activities, the groups, the local groups are organized based on location and groups, and they haven't considered the roles of traditional community representatives in handling violations. And also there's no generals are considered because they think that the forest protection need house and only men should be involved.
1 minute.
Yeah, and for community custom in natural resources use, there are conflicts in the community because forest resources exploitation are accepted for only family use, not for commercial use. And the prejudice of community as only a forest protector, not a forest user, that leads to a lot of regulation that do not allow for community to exploit the timber from the forest. There are difficulties to maintain and utilize indigenous knowledge in the context of crop structure change and also market orientation. Next slide, please. Next, please. Here we have some recommendation at policy level and also community level. Like at the policy level, they have to develop a legal mechanism for the collective ownership. They respect, protect, and integrate community institution in the natural resource management mechanism. They also have to consider the local factors like the receiving capacity of the community and also the local official capacity. And at a higher level, there must be cooperation between development sector like forestry, agriculture, and the cultural sectors. At community levels, they have to consider the diversity and specificity of each region and each ethnic group. As in Vietnam, there are up to 54 ethnic groups with different cultures and customs. The traditional convention must be integrated into current village regulations, and the traditional event must be recovered and protected for better community connections and also education. Especially, we would like to recommend that we can promote the community-based production and value chain toward organic and environmental quality to promote indigenous knowledge in reality. Next, please. Next, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kim. So I thank you very, that was a very comprehensive and clear presentation. So I now go on to the next country from Thailand, Dr. Prasert.
Yes, thank you very much.
So
do you hear me?
you're very soft. I mean, it's very weak voice. Can you please speak louder, Dr.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's better.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to join the presentation. Normally, the organizer invite another friend, but he's not free, so asked me to help, and maybe not well prepared and too much. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah, the term or define the customary tenure for indigenous people. It is a cultural heritage. It is the root of knowledge, values, and also rights. So this very important. Our elders always say that that means when you stick to the rules and customary law and practice, you are always safe for everything and in every event. So, however, in Thailand, we have problems of the recognition of the land and territory of indigenous people, because by law, all forest mountain areas belong to the state. So indigenous people in the forest mountain area, they base on customary tenure to settle there. And however, no laws support the customary tenure or our settlement. So because it is unsecure of indigenous people in their land and territory. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah. According to the current policy and practice development in the country, I can say that the customary tenure already I mentioned that not recognized, not aware at all levels, and this it is something, and it will link to the EPIC. EPIC, it is very new. I think that not many people know about EPIC, so they cannot develop into policy and use for the implementation plan. Committee-based forest management is always practiced by indigenous people. The community for rotational farming is a majority of the indigenous, especially the current Lua sea practice, but is not recognized and still in the process of the need to do a lot of lobby and negotiate on this process. Next, please. Next, please. The challenge, I think that the customary tenures or customary law and practice, it is still what we call negative belief or attitude, not support in this process. But particularly when you link with rights or land rights, this is something that the policy not recognize. I try to what we call stop or ban or this kind of thing. This is still strongly in Thailand, and law, policy, national plan, not yet open for customary tenures. That something still. I used to have an opportunity to raise this in the national policy maker about the law. And we're talking about customary law and all kinds of that, and linked to the legal pluralism. But the lawyers in the national will say that they don't have a master plan on this kind of law yet, so that it's difficult to create the plural legal pluralism law in that way. Opportunities, it did that people organization, indigenous community need to create their own good practice to solve and to prove that themselves on to use customary law and practice, the customary tenures. It did only one thing, and they need to have a strong for the negotiation for the rights on the customary tenure. In the same time, they have a kinds of waiting for new law. For example, like Tel Aviv try to draft the act. Sorry, do you hear me?
Yes, yes, please go on.
Okay, thank you. The draft or ethnic group in Thailand, because the word indigenous are not recognized by the government. So ethnic group or Chatipan, that's one of the term by the institution. So this act maybe, hopefully will proceed into the approval, and some new thing maybe we expect to have it. I think that another thing we need to use an international agreement or declaration or to promote the customary tenures. This I think that need to work what we call in different levels, especially in the national level, to inform and to influence the national policy this way. Next, please. Next, please. Okay, recommendation I will do shortly. In Thailand, we try, even not recognize our cultural land and territory or customary law, but try to create what we call the good model, good practice model. For example, the declaration of special cultural zone as based on customary law and practice or kind of that to promote to the policymaker. Another thing that we need to work more and more with the policymakers or the high level of the government who make decisions, come and see and pass visit the community where we arrange the good practice for them to see and to exchange and learn from there. In the same time, need to create more and more interaction between government agency and the indigenous people in the diverse events or diverse levels through the practical activity, the community level. Lastly, international mechanism. This area need to create diverse event and to influence the national government, national policy to recognize the customary tenures and recognize of EPIC. But particularly about EPIC, it is a very, I think, no people use it, no policy pick up. Only indigenous people that start aware of this, that start use some of the area, but very limited of this area. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Prasit. And also, I like the emphasis on creating spaces for indigenous community and practical interaction together with government and other stakeholders. Thank you very much. I would now like to invite to the virtual floor the next country. So, Emmy, prima donna from Indonesia. Nice to see you here, Emmy.
Hi, thank you, Edna. Can I share my own share screen?
Yeah, I
Okay,
think
let
we
me
can.
do it.
So I would like to remind the speakers of our 5-minute rule. I'm sorry, but it needs to be that way. But you can do it, Emmy. You can do it, Emmy. 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Edna. Good afternoon, everybody. Please introduce myself. My name is Emi Primadona. I'm a program coordinator in KKIWARSI. KKIWARSI is a NGO based in Sumatra in Indonesia. We work more on the facilitating of the social forestry in Indonesia and also advocating the indigenous people who lives in and around the forest. So our titles presentations for today is about strengthening the recognitions of customary tenure right Indonesia, Serampas Customary Forest. So when we talk about customary forest, it's part of the social forestry schemes in Indonesia, which have 5 different schemes. The first one is village forest. Village forest, it means that the state forest, which is based refers to administrative of the village, can propose to have recognitions by the governments for 35 years. The community forestry, second one is community forestry. It's more on the group of people who already manage the forest, can propose to the Ministry of Environment and Forestry to have the recognitions. Number 3 is community timber plantation. Number 4 is customary forest, and the last one is partnership. Number 1 until 1, 2, 3, and number 5, they can have recognitions or legalizations for 35 years, and it can be extended another 35 years. The different things is number 4 regarding to the customary forest. Based on the law, it says in Indonesia is customary forest is not state forest. It means that when the customary forests get recognitions of the governments, as long as the customary forest, the customary people still there or the indigenous people still there manage the forest sustainably, they can hold the license forever as the customary forest. So what are the principles of the social forestry in Indonesia? There are 4 main principles why the social forestry is very important. The first one is to improve the community's welfare because they already get the recognitions by the license, even though only 35 years or forever. It means that they got a guarantee. They have secured their tenure right to manage the forest. And the second one is a means of conflict resolutions for forest management. In the past, when the local community doesn't have the legalizations, it's like an open access. Everybody or every person can enter to the forest and saying that this is not your forest. So it can be a conflict between the stakeholders in the field. And the fourth one is a legal management unit at the ground level, because when the social forestry get recognitions, they have the institutions who have the management right, who have the management plan, and they have to report it every year to make sure that it can be managed in sustainably way. And the fourth one is about increasing community participations on forest management. So this is the examples of the Serampas women who are sitting on the front line. They are indigenous people in Serampas, Kabupaten Merangin District in Jambi Province. They are indigenous people who already manage the area before the Independence Day of Indonesia. However, because they haven't got recognitions officially, and it's become open access. Many people from the south of Sumatra came to that area. They opened the forest and become the coffee plantations. So it started by hectare, and it become very massive. So the women is not happy because their tenure right has been degraded doing the illegal loggers from the outsiders, and they stand at the front and saying that you should go away from our land, our ancestral land, our indigenous land, because the man itself is not really successful and the woman come on the front line. So because of the activities, the police, and they are doing mediations and come to the police to say that what they should do in the future. So this is part of the FPIC process that was done with the local community. Basically in Indonesia, we haven't got FPIC guidelines formally as nationally or regionally, but we do have safeguard, system information of safeguard for the RED Plus. It's only that we have, but we don't have the FP process yet. But on the field, WARSI doing like the facilitations to local community. How do the process that when we want to propose the forest area to be the customary forest to the governments. So we are doing over-layer consultations from the village, from the sub-village, to women group, to the youth, to marginal people, until we got an agreement and consensus that this is very important, that we want to propose this area to be the customary forest. So at the end, we talk to the representative of we talk to the governments. It takes quite a while, yeah, to discuss that we need the recognitions. Different with other scheme, when we talk about the customary forest, we must to make sure that there are 4 elements that they have to fulfill. The first one, there must be recognition of customary people. Who are they? And the area, the history that to support that they are really indigenous people and customary people. And the 4th times, they should have regional regulations. So the most important things we must have regional regulation to make sure that this is really the customary people and they have the customary area. So this is a Serampas village. They are surrounded by the forest. You can see that they have a local wisdom in that area. The area near to the river, they cannot. They protect it, so they cannot open any development plan over there. So near the river, they can plant a paddy rice field, and they have like a special micro special plans for the household, for a settlement, for the plantations, for the protected area, and for paddy field. So we can see that really they have respected the customary knowledge that how to manage the forest sustainably by imposing on the village regulations in micro spatial plan. Next, we do have at the end, the Serampas people get the legalizations from the governments, and the president of Jokowi give the license directly to the head of the customary people in Serampas. And after that, we've been thinking that when they got recognition, is it also important to do any, economic value over the forest resources? So in Serampas people or in customary people, we do develop like protecting forests while harvesting income from tree adoption. It started in 2014, so we invite public to adopt the tree in that in the Rantau Kermas with the diameter is more than 60 centimeters. For 1 unit is 200,000 rupiah per year. So far the Rantau Kermas people already get an income from tree adoption. It's more than 224 million rupiah from the tree adoption. And the money itself, it can use to do forest patrol, strengthening customary group, scholarship, improving the infrastructure. So we try to make them, become independent. They have their own income to manage the forest by promoting the tree adoptions in that area. And then because of the main resources or main livelihood of the local community is planting the coffee, we try to promote the premium coffee, fine Robusta, that really give the, good quality. So we only harvest the red cherry of coffee, and so far they already have a productions more than 1 ton per month, and we already have a stable buyers every month from the Serampas coffee.
Emmy?
Yes,
Time is up, yeah. But you can wrap up, please.
Okay, so based on this our experience in Serampas, we do things that when we talk about the legalization of customary forest, it's also very important to think about how to support this customary forest so they can manage the forest sustainably, whether through the energy, whether to income generation, or through the capacity buildings. I think that's all, Edna. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emmy, and loving those stories about brave women of defending their customary lands. Thank you, thank you. So now I go on to Indonesia. I call now Gordon John Thomas. Gordon from Pacos Trust. Welcome to the virtual floor. Please be reminded of our 5-minute rule. Sorry for that. Gordon?
Gordon will be, we will play the video recording of Gordon.
Okay.
Hi everyone, my name is Gordon John Thomas from Borneo. First of all, I'm very sorry that I cannot join for today's event. But today I'm going to share more towards on the Malaysia situation on customary tenure and FPIC. So bear with me. I'm just gonna share my files. Okay, hold on. Okay. So yeah. So first of all, I just want to explain about the IP in Malaysia. So there's 3 categories. One is the orang asli in the peninsula, the Dayak or the Orang Ulu in Sarawak, and also the Anak Negeri in Sabah. So all of the 3 category is consisting as orang asal or the indigenous people in Malaysia. So talking about the territory or the customary territory here in Malaysia, this is what the overview how the IP look at their territory. They have forests to get the medicine or hunting, and also place for their sector area, and also they do have agriculture for the short term like rice, vegetables, but also they do have long-term agriculture like rubber. And apart from that, they also need water. Yeah, they need water and also the source of protein like river. So this is how the customary territory look like in Malaysia. And talking about their territory, actually they have their own local names. They have their own local names. In Sabah, each ethnic, they have their own names of their territory. Even in Sarawak, like Pamakai Menua, and also in Peninsula, actually, they have their own terms in terms of the customary territory. And talking about the policies that recognize the customary territory, we have like 3. One is the Federal Constitution. It's under the Article 161, where it says that it will provide and recognize the reservation of land for IP in Sabah and Sarawak. And also for the Aborigine or the Orang Asli in Peninsula, they have in the the National Land Code in 1965 saying that customary tenure or the traditional recognition of the customary tenure will be given under Civil Law Act 1965. Yeah. And also like for the states, for the state in Sabah and Sarawak, we have this custom. We call it the native customary rights. This is why how to say it? It's a customary territory that been given for the communities, the indigenous communities in Sabah and Sarawak. Yeah. So talking about FPIC. The FPIC situation, actually, the IP they're already practicing FPIC since the beginning of time. Yeah, like Mamason, Mamatang, and also Mrlg. These three practices are saying that it's not only they are asking permission to the community, but also they will asking the permission to use that area from the guardian or the spirit of that area. So it's not talking about only the social, but also the spiritual. So this is very holistic, yeah, very holistic. Apart from that, the community protocol. At first it's orally, but now it's been strategically, it's been documented into books, and basically it's a rule and regulation, yeah, that it based from the customary practices or customary institution or governance, yeah, among the communities, and also it's a do and don'ts for the outsider. If they want to do something development, they need to how to say, they need to ask permission, they need to consent all the and also inform the community about what are the activity, what are the impact to the community, and what is the benefit for the communities, yeah. So this is the situation, FPIC situation here in Malaysia. There's several industry that I can categorize here. The palm oil industry, it adheres to FPIC as part of MSPO and RSPO requirement. They do have to, the companies, the oil palm companies have to abide or have to follow under the MSPO or under the certification like MSPO and RSPO. The oil and gas, in 2016, Petronas did mention about the IP assessment, land acquisition, and also involuntary resettlement and cultural heritage assessment as part of the technical guidelines. So they do mention about it. But yeah, FPIC still remain absent, yeah, in terms of the timber industry. So when we're talking about the timber industry, I think I can say the FPIC mechanism has not, or guideline has not been properly implemented. And also FPIC has not been recognized in terms of the development project. Just a good example like the Kaiduan Dam, the Papar Dam that has been they still try to, how to say, the community try to defend the area on the development of the dam in that area, yeah. So but if we can say about the policies in Malaysia, basically we still don't have any proper FPIC policies or standalone policies, but we do have like some provisional that mention about FPIC, yeah. So when talking about the international policy, yes, the UN RIP, Malaysia endorsed the UN RIP and also ratified the Convention of Biology Diversity, the CBD, yeah. And then again, what I was mentioned just now previously about there's no standalone FPIC, and it's more on the provisional of the legal or the policies, such as the one is the National Policies on Access to Biology Resources and Benefit Sharing 2017, which just mention about the IP knowledge and also the protection of the rights, and also the FPIC processes during to the researcher for whenever they have research going on in the community territory. The Federal Constitution also in Article 8 also allow the provisional to protect and well-being and advancement of Aboriginal people in the peninsula, so the orang asli, yeah, and also provide welfare and also provide the preferential treatment to Sabah and Sarawak native. Other than that, in 1961 Statement of Policies also did recognize special position of Aboriginal in respect of the land usage and the land rights, yeah. And lastly, I think this is also very important about the Sabah Biodiversity Enactment in 2000 under the Section 9 and also Section 16. Well, the Section 9 was mentioned about the ensure the IPLC the custodian of their knowledge and collective benefit from the use of their knowledge, and the Section 16 mainly about talking about the protection of the land under the native customary rights, yeah. So talking about the challenge and recommendation, like I was mentioned just now, there's no national law, yeah. There's no standalone law about the FPIC. So it's more towards on the provisional, only the small, I mean, it's in some component of the law. So I think it's very important that we have, like, you know, a separate national legislation providing on the rights of the IPs to FPIC, to all matter that prevent to all affected them. And also this is also very important that to develop and agree upon the IP representative, talking about the FPIC mechanism, yeah, and it should make it compulsory to everyone. So it's not meant, so it will, this guideline or this mechanism will be embedded to every policies or every actors that want to develop in the IP area or territory. So I think that's pretty much about my sharing. Thank you very much. There's several reference here that I took. One is from the baseline for the study of the FPIC by Dr. Colin, and also there's one publication from the Red and Roll talking about the FPIC situation here in Malaysia. So thank you very much, Ponsiko, and thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that from our Malaysian partner, Pacos Trust. And now the last speaker for this set is, of course, my very good colleague, Roger Garingas from the Philippines. Roger?
Yeah, yes, thank you, Edna. I wasn't able to, and I was supposed not to be able to attend, but that's why I asked Dazzle to just play the recording. I have 5 minutes there. So Dazzle, may I request that you just play the video? Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you and good afternoon. My brief presentation summarizes the status, challenges, and opportunities of customary tenure and free, prior, and informed consent in the Philippines, hoping that it will contribute in informing and shaping guidelines or guidance relevant to customary tenure and FPIC in the ASEAN region. Indigenous peoples in the Philippines is comprised of 112 groups distributed in the entire Philippine archipelago. The population of indigenous peoples is estimated to be around 12 to 15% of the country's population of 110 million individuals. The map gives us an indication of the extent and distribution of their ancestral domain, therefore. The Philippines' significant contribution to the world in recognizing the rights of indigenous peoples is already contained in the Constitution itself. Customary tenure recognition first was temporary or weak, but a good start when the Environment Agency passed a policy that provides seigneurial instrument in the form of certificate of ancestral domain claim to indigenous peoples. Another one was issued in 1995 by the president itself, who allows not only IPs, but also local communities or non-indigenous peoples through a 25-year contract. But the more important form of recognition is contained in Republic Act 8371 that enabled indigenous peoples to be issued with a title known as Certificate of Ancestral Domain Title. On the FPIC, only Republic Act 8371 provides for the clearer and indigenous people exclusive guidelines on the FPIC. Although Local Government Code of 1991 provides for a mandatory consultation, but it applies to all citizens, including indigenous peoples. Currently, CADTs are given to indigenous people applicants, but the challenges are great, such as it's really tedious and costly on the part of the communities applying for such. And on top of that, NCIP is facing very limited funds and personnel, while land grabbing continues or selling and buying. So hoping that there is still ancestral domain left to talk about when the processing of the CADT application commences in the future, hopefully in the near future. FPIC is also implemented, but one thing In fact, there are several controversies involving alleged manipulation resulting to the cases being filed before competent courts. There are lots of projects that do not respect or comply the FPIC guidelines, and they seem to go away with it. In my province, there are several cases related to non-FPIC respect, even by government projects. Nevertheless, there are opportunities for the Philippines while fixing the country processing issues. For example, the ACCA bill pending in Congress is an added layer of recognition and protection. So we hope that champions of ancestral domain and IP rights will win in the 22 elections to pursue the passage of the ACCA bill in the legislature. For the lessons and recommendations that the ASEAN may consider, it's really favorable to have a legal environment, which is a huge step. And the Philippines is already there. The second is that prejudices versus indigenous people must be addressed because it still prevails in the Philippine society and probably elsewhere. And so there must also be effective safeguards mechanism against manipulation of FPIC process. And as always, public funding is crucial. It is only not for customary tenure, but implementing management plans when ancestral domain titles are issued. It is too much for the poor indigenous people communities to shoulder the millions of pesos needed for each certificate of ancestral domain title application. And finally, safeguards mechanism for internal management of conflict and resolution among indigenous peoples communities must be in place for internal accountability. Thank you very much, and hoping that the information given here will help really inform and shape the ASEAN guidelines on customary tenure and free, prior, and informed consent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Roger. That was a very clear presentation. And if they wanted to know more about the various FPIC case studies we did in 10 years ago, NTFP with the National Commission on Indigenous People, DNR, commission a legal audit and assessment of 35 case studies, FPIC case studies in communities, and it's really a very exciting assessment. So you might want to check it out at ntfp.org knowledge portal or the dnr.gov knowledge portal. Thank you very much. So thank you to the speakers, and sorry it took a while, but turning over to Femi for the final message and summation. Thank you very much.
If we can have one more.
One more, yeah.
Yeah, but we ask Timothy Salomon, who is the National Coordinator for the National Land Coalition in Asia, and also the Policy Coordinator for Bukluran, which is the Philippine ICCA Consortium, to speak, but maybe if we can request just a very short intervention. Thank you, Tim.
Okay, surely, thank you. Apologies, I didn't know that. Yeah, I'll present my slides very quickly. Yeah, so this was discussed already by the initial previous speaker. I just want to highlight that the current policy in practice, native titles recognized as a fundamental principle, but the titles are delineated as an act of state recognition. I guess that's what we need to differentiate. Indigenous peoples also access social forestry programs and other tenure regimes, such as agrarian reform, especially for cases when the ancestral domains have been taken over by haciendas or plantations owned by local landed elite. ICCA is emerging as a new way of recognition of traditional governance over sacred territories. And there is an emerging ICCA registry, so we have a website for that, icca.ph. and there are existing policies on FPIC. There is a policy, the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, that recognizes traditional decision making, but there leaves much to be desired in terms of the certification that the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act affords traditional decision making. So I go straight to the challenges, gaps, and opportunities. For customary tenure, there are tremendous delays and costs, as mentioned earlier. There is a prevailing stalemate among agencies in terms of settling administrative procedures in the recognition of true landowners and land users. The problem with the Philippines is that we have so many land tenure regimes, and the issue is that indigenous people's lands are the most costly and the longest process. So it boils down to who is the fastest among the agencies to release the land titles, and who is the first one has sort of a dibs or a first touch on the land. So indigenous people's territories tend to be the last to be recognized. There are cases of criminalization wherein strict implementation of land resource rights are criminalized. Several incidents of arbitrary arrest and legal harassment is not uncommon, but there's a Supreme Court decision recently being enforced in favor of indigenous people's resource rights. Finally, I believe we have a harmonious relationship with the Biodiversity Management Bureau of the government, which we are exploring in terms of integrating the ICCA database in the official protected area system of government. Finally, on FPIC, the challenges: smaller non-controversial initiatives and projects FPIC has upheld but are markedly corporatized. I mean to say that that the government sorts of draws money from the private sector to get consent from in any case. There is for projects that the government and private sector have high stake or conflict of interest, the process is highly manipulated. Often the modus operandi involves state officials selecting hand-picked representatives that favor the mega projects. Ergo, those who oppose are deliberately left out. I believe it needs to be said that these cases are turning violent. Those who oppose are tagged as insurgents or communist terrorists, which we call as red tagging in the Philippines, because red is the color of the insurgent group in the Philippines. This results in the Philippines consistently ranking the top of the most dangerous country in the world for land environment defenders, and those killed are mostly indigenous peoples. One extreme example is the Tumandok massacre last December 2020, where 9 IP leaders were killed and 17 were imprisoned for their opposition to the Halour Dam, which FPIC process was markedly replete with irregularities. So in any case, my recommendations are here. We need to build the capacities of indigenous peoples. Information was provided to IPs in terms of international industry standards when discerning their options, and to ensure fair terms for when they say yes. We need to address the issue on overlapping claims with finality and with speed. As said earlier, we need to pass the ICCA bill. On top of that, we need to institutionalize the ICCA registry. You could visit the website of the ICCA registry in icca.ph. We need to ensure the integrity of FPIC certification by government. I guess this is something as a warning to everyone in Southeast Asia that although the Philippines can be said to be one of the most progressive in terms of policy, in terms of customary tenure and FPIC, the irony is because in law, indigenous communities win in terms of legal battles. But the problem is this leads the companies and the government to engage in violence because they have no legal recourse. So what we need to do is to establish a platform and resources to develop and promote IP's development plans. We need to allow the indigenous peoples to first define their aspirations and plans before outsiders offer or force plans on them. This will enable them to define the engagement they desire, since they still need partnership, especially for capital to invest in the self-identified livelihoods. So, thank you.
So much, Tim, and for being very tried to squeeze everything in such a short time, and with such important issues that you also left us with for us to remember and consider. with regards to customary tenure recognition, and those were also quite critical issues to share. We have run out really on time, and thank you so much for staying on until 6 o'clock here in the Philippines, and for 5 o'clock for the rest of the ASEAN, and probably for those who are also joining us in the other parts of the world. But if you can indulge me with just maybe 2 minutes to run through some synthesis slides, but I may not be able to go through all of them because of time, but at least to share this with you very quickly, and to also say that we will have the recording as well as also presentations being made available. We'll just try and find a way, maybe send the Google Drive link for everyone to be able to access the slides. So I think we had such a we didn't actually, to be honest, we didn't expect such reception, and really having successfully gathered together such rich information of the status of customary tenure and FPIC in ASEAN. And I think, yeah, can I go to next slide, please? So from a very positive start and encouraging keynotes, no less than from Dr. Bambang Supriyanto, who is the chair of the ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry, who will be the main champion and lead and facilitator for this process onto next year, and where he also generously also shared the experience of Indonesia, having used also the social forestry as a way to build some reforms in the country, in Indonesia, and perhaps lessons from that can also be gleaned for this process that we are embarking on. Next, after Dr. Bambang, we had also a very positive and encouraging note from our friend from the ASEAN Secretariat. Please, next slide. That highlighted that there is now a momentum for addressing more developments and addressing key issues in the forestry sector right now, and also linking this process that we are going to embark on different issues and the momentum, such as with climate change and COP26, with the commitment that has been made globally by various leaders, and how we can also take on other issues related to benefits in the forestry sector, benefits for local communities, together with our discussion. Next slide, please. So we also had an overview from Dr. Mika Ingalls, basically also as a development partner. The Mekong Regional Land Governance is also has contributed a lot, and even prior to this process, they have already started to work on key domains of action, not only in customary tenure, but also on responsible agriculture investments. And they are looking forward to continue to cooperate and engage in this process. Next slide, please. We had 3 presentations from the first session on global and regional trends. Basically, I would just cut this short and just summarize to say that the message that we got from session 1 is that there are vital opportunities for customary tenure recognition. There's already a trend of legislation happening elsewhere in the world, and we can double the gains where rights are recognized and benefits are attained by communities. While there is a positive trend in forest tenure, FPIC might be taking it slow, but again, there is an opportunity of interest for the ASEAN. Next slide. GAM started us off with very good insights about principles that can be considered in relation to the moving forward with customary tenure recognition, and some higher values and principles that we could put in, including on environmental sustainability, and also this principle of pluralism and vision of pluralism, that it is not only about indigenous peoples, but also customary tenure recognition is also going to contribute for the larger good of the society. Next slide, please. Maytin Newman, joining us from Myanmar. I think she gave such a very insightful perspective from the youth, but also linking the concept of customary tenure, not just of youth engagement and the future, but also on food security and livelihood security and principles of equitability and the importance of political stability in moving forward. Next slide. The session 2 gave us a very comprehensive view of the state of customary tenure recognition in FPIC and ASEAN. It was indeed the start of hearing of work that has been done already to consolidate and collect evidence from the ground, where there might be further opportunities, there might be policy headways, but there might also be some policy gaps. And what those challenges are in moving forward, but at least there might be challenges, but now we are aware of them, picking that up from research and evidence and some recommendations from all this work that has been going on. Next slide, please. Oh, I think it's in the next slide, but maybe I can skip that one. Okay, I think maybe in the next slide, because I think the other notes were not incorporated. So let me just go and take mine then. Can you stop? Yes. Let me just go to the. But I think I will not go through the country slides, but just to say that they have been quite enlightening. I should say that from Cambodia, from Laos, from Myanmar, from Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia, and the Philippines, various points were made about some of the gaps, but then there are also affirmation of some of the policy advances that are already there that we can take advantage of. There are also some challenges, and I think there was also a key message from Myanmar where despite many challenges, so long as the communities are there continuing to apply their customary practices, I think that this quest for customary tenure recognition, because there are people who will be representing that issue, can still prevail and can still push on despite many challenges from policy gaps, from political instability, and many different conflicts that are happening at the moment. But the final point that I would say, I think that we captured from all the main messages is that people, indigenous peoples and local communities must be at the heart of the process, more than just participation and engagement. I think it's a good message to say that really having the recognition of who these customary peoples are, and what are their practices, and essentially with the recognition of these peoples and local communities, then there could be a very meaningful discussion to move forward with the recognition process, or maybe with the framework and the guidelines development process. Part of the discussion would be about unpacking all this, the concept of customary tenure recognition, including concepts of ownership, access, control, benefits, and responsibilities, not to forget youth and women in the discussion, and that both customary tenure and FPIC may be seen as two sides of the same coin. If customary tenure is recognized and secured, FPIC could be invoked and be successful, and that could also be seen from a self-determined point of view. So with that, I thank you all. There will be a second day for the ASEAN member states, and we really look forward to having a reflection meeting and discussion with our esteemed ASEAN member state delegates. And but for the rest of our participants, please, this is just the first event and first step of our process, which will continue to run until next year. And so we hope to see you again in the next events, online, hybrid, or maybe by next year, maybe we would be able to have a physical face-to-face event. So thank you very much for staying on, and have a good evening.